Philosophy, love of wisdom in ancient Greek, is a systematic study of general and fundamental questions concerning topics like existence, reason, knowledge, value, mind, and language. It is a rational and critical inquiry that reflects on its own methods and assumptions. Historically, many of the individual sciences, like physics and psychology, formed part of philosophy, but they are considered separate academic disciplines in the modern sense of the term. The main traditions in the history of philosophy include Western, Arabic Persian, Indian, and Chinese philosophy. Western philosophy originated in ancient Greece and covers a wide area of philosophical subfields. A central topic in Arabic Persian philosophy is the relation between reason and revelation. Indian philosophy combines the spiritual problem of how to reach enlightenment with the exploration of the nature of reality and the ways of arriving at knowledge. Chinese philosophy focuses on practical issues in relation to right social conduct, government, and self-cultivation. Major branches of philosophy are epistemology, ethics, logic, and metaphysics. Epistemology studies what knowledge is and how to acquire it. Ethics investigates moral principles and what constitutes right conduct. Logic is the study of correct reasoning and explores how good arguments can be distinguished from bad ones. Metaphysics examines the most general features of reality, existence, objects, and properties. Other notable subfields are aesthetics, philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, philosophy of religion, philosophy of science, philosophy of history, and political philosophy. Philosophers use a great variety of methods to arrive at philosophical knowledge. They include conceptual analysis, reliance on common sense and intuitions, use of thought experiments, analysis of ordinary language, description of experience, and critical questioning. Philosophy is related to many other fields, like the sciences, mathematics, business, law, and journalism. It provides an interdisciplinary perspective and studies their scope and fundamental concepts. It also investigates their methods and ethical implications. Etymology. The word philosophy comes from the ancient Greek words phi lambda omicron, philos, love, and sigma omicron phi alpha, Sophia, wisdom. 1, 2, 3. Some sources say that the term was coined by the Presocratic philosopher Pythagoras, but this is not certain. 4, 5. Wood engraving of Isaac Newton under an apple tree. Physics was originally part of philosophy, like Isaac Newton's observation of how gravity affects falling apples. The word entered the English language primarily from Old French and Anglo-Norman starting around 1175 CE. The French philosophy is itself a borrowing from the Latin philosophia. The term philosophy acquired the meanings of advanced study of the speculative subjects, logic, ethics, physics, and metaphysics, deep wisdom consisting of love of truth and virtuous living, profound learning as transmitted by the ancient writers, and the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, and the basic limits of human understanding. 6. 1. Before the modern age, the term philosophy was used in a wide sense. It included most forms of rational inquiry, like the individual sciences, as its subdisciplines. 1, 7, 8. For instance, natural philosophy was a major branch of philosophy. 9, 10, 11, 12. This branch of philosophy encompassed a wide range of fields, including disciplines like physics, chemistry, and biology. 1, 13. An example of this usage is the 1687 book Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica by Isaac Newton. This book referred to natural philosophy in its title, but it is today considered a book of physics. 11, 12, 14. The meaning of philosophy changed toward the end of the modern period when it acquired the more narrow meaning common today. In this new sense, the term is mainly associated with philosophical disciplines like metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Among other topics, it covers the rational study of reality, knowledge, and values. However, it is distinguished from other disciplines of rational inquiry like the empirical sciences and mathematics. 15. Conceptions of philosophy. General conception. The practice of philosophy is characterized by various general features. It is a form of rational inquiry. It aims to be systematic, and it tends to critically reflect on its own methods and presuppositions. 16. It requires thinking as hard and as clearly about some of the most interesting and enduring problems that human minds have ever encountered. 17. According to the 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant, the task of philosophy is united by 4 questions. 1. What can I know? 2. What should I do? 3. What may I hope? And 4. what is the human being? His entire career, as he conceived it, was devoted to systematically addressing these four questions, 18, 19, 20. The theme of self-critical intellectual humility may be traced back to the origins of Western philosophy. Socrates, as depicted in Plato's dialogues, famously expresses incredulity when told by the oracle at Delphi that he is the wisest person of all. What he comes to conclude is that his wisdom consists in his knowing that he does not possess the most exalted kind of wisdom, namely, that about what is truly fine and good. 21, 22, consistent with his well-known assertion that the unexamined life is not worth living, Socrates arrives at the conclusion that the active pursuit of wisdom is good and valuable in itself, irrespective of whether one ever arrives at final definitions. 23, 24, this is consistent with the view that the kind of knowledge that philosophy seeks is not information, but understanding. 25. Confronting the unlikelihood of ever arriving at final answers to the great questions of philosophy, Bertrand Russell offers this justification for nevertheless undertaking the labor. The man who has no tincture of philosophy goes through life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense, from the habitual beliefs of his age or his nation, and from convictions which have grown up in his mind without the cooperation or consent of his deliberate reason. 26, 27, this passage has been cited to advance an interpretation of philosophy as freeing us from prejudice, self-deceptive notions, and half-truths. 28. Attempts to define philosophy in precise terms are controversial. 29, 14, and are studied in the subdiscipline known as metaphilosophy. 30. Some approaches argue that there is a set of essential features shared by all parts of philosophy. Others see only weaker family resemblances or contend that it is merely an empty blanket term. 31, 32, 33. Precise definitions are often only accepted by theorists belonging to a certain philosophical movement and are revisionistic according to Soren Overgaard et al. In that many presumed parts of philosophy would not deserve the title philosophy if they were true. 34, 35. Some definitions characterize philosophy in relation to its method, like pure reasoning. Others focus on its topic, for example, as the study of the biggest patterns of the world as a whole or as the attempt to answer the big questions. 36, 37, 38. Both approaches have the problem that they are usually either too wide, by including non-philosophical disciplines, or too narrow, by excluding some philosophical subdisciplines. 36. Many definitions of philosophy emphasize its intimate relation to science. 14. In this sense, philosophy is sometimes understood as a proper science in its own right. According to some naturalistic philosophers, like W.V.O. Quine, philosophy is an empirical yet abstract science that is concerned with wide-ranging empirical patterns instead of particular observations. 39, 40. Science-based definitions usually face the problem of explaining why philosophy in its long history has not made the type of progress seen in other sciences. 41, 42. 43. This problem is avoided by seeing philosophy as an immature or provisional science whose subdisciplines cease to be philosophy once they have fully developed. 14, 32, 44. In this sense, philosophy is sometimes described as the midwife of the sciences. 45, 14. Other definitions focus on the contrast between science and philosophy. A common theme among many such conceptions is that philosophy is concerned with meaning, understanding, or the clarification of language. 46, 47. According to one view, philosophy is conceptual analysis, which involves finding the necessary and sufficient conditions for the application of concepts. 48, 38, 49. Phenomenologists, such as Edmund Husserl, characterize philosophy as a rigorous science investigating essences. 50. They practice a radical suspension of theoretical assumptions about reality in order to get back to the things themselves, that is, as originally given in experience. They contend that this base level of experience provides the foundation for higher-order theoretical knowledge, and that one needs to understand the former in order to understand the latter. 51. Another approach presents philosophy as a linguistic therapy. According to Ludwig Wittgenstein, for example, philosophy aims at dispelling misunderstandings to which humans are susceptible due to the confusing structure of natural language. 14, 52, 53. An early approach found in ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, and later adopted by 20th-century philosophers such as Michel Foucault and Pierre Hadot, is that philosophy is the spiritual practice of developing one's rational capacities. 54, 55. this practice is an expression of the philosopher's love of wisdom and has the aim of improving one's well-being by leading a reflective life. 56. Another definition characterizes philosophy as thinking about thinking. This emphasizes its self-critical, reflective nature. 57, 58. History. Main article, History of Philosophy. As a discipline, the history of philosophy aims to provide a systematic and chronological exposition of philosophical concepts and doctrines. 59, 60, 61. Some theorists see it as a part of intellectual history, but it also investigates questions not covered by intellectual history, such as whether the theories of past philosophers are true and have remained philosophically relevant. 62. The history of philosophy is primarily concerned with theories based on rational inquiry and argumentation. However, some historians understand it in a looser sense that includes myths, religious teachings, and proverbial lore. 63. The main traditions in the history of philosophy include Western, Arabic, Persian, Indian, and Chinese philosophy. Other influential philosophical traditions are Japanese philosophy, Latin American philosophy, and African philosophy. 64. Western. Main article, Western philosophy. Photo of a statue of Aristotle. Statue of Aristotle, a major figure of ancient Greek philosophy, in Aristotle's Park, Stagira. Western philosophy originated in ancient Greece in the 6th century BCE with the Presocratics. They attempted to provide rational explanations of the cosmos as a whole. 65, 66, 67. The philosophy following them was shaped by Socrates, 469 to 399 BCE, Plato, 427 to 347 BCE, and Aristotle, 384 to 322 BCE. They expanded the range of topics to questions like how people should act, how to arrive at knowledge, and what the nature of reality and mind is. 68, 69. The later part of the ancient period was marked by the emergence of philosophical movements like Epicureanism, Stoicism, Skepticism, and Neoplatonism. 70, 71, 72. The medieval period started in the 5th century CE. Its focus was on religious topics and many thinkers used ancient philosophy to explain and further elaborate Christian doctrines. 73, 74, 75. The Renaissance period started in the 14th century and saw a renewed interest in various schools of ancient philosophy, in particular Platonism. Humanism also emerged in this period. 76. The modern period started in the 17th century. One of its central concerns was how philosophical and scientific knowledge are created. Specific importance was given to the role of reason and sensory experience. 77, 78. Many of these innovations were used in the Enlightenment movement to challenge traditional authorities. 79, 80. Various attempts to develop all-inclusive systems of philosophy were made in the 19th century, for example, by German idealism. 81. Influential developments in 20th century philosophy were the emergence and application of formal logic and the focus on the role of language, as well as pragmatism and movements in continental philosophy like phenomenology, existentialism, and postmodernism. 82, 83. The 20th century saw a rapid expansion of academic philosophy in terms of the number of philosophical publications and philosophers working at academic institutions. 82. There was also a noticeable growth in the number of female philosophers, but they still remained underrepresented. 84. Arabic Persian philosophy arose in the early 9th century CE as a response to discussions in the Islamic theological tradition. Its classical period lasted until the 12th century CE and was strongly influenced by ancient Greek philosophers. It employed their ideas to elaborate and interpret the teachings of the Quran. 85. Portrait of Avicenna on a silver vase. An Iranian portrait of Avicenna on a silver vase. He was one of the most influential philosophers of the Islamic Golden Age. Al-Kindi, 801 to 873 CE, is usually regarded as the first philosopher of this tradition. He translated and interpreted many works of Aristotle and Neoplatonists in his attempt to show that there is a harmony between reason and faith. 86. Avicenna, 980 to 1037 CE, also followed this goal and developed a comprehensive philosophical system to provide a rational understanding of reality encompassing science, religion, and mysticism. 87. 88. Al-Ghazali, 1058 to 1111 CE, was a strong critic of the idea that reason can arrive at a true understanding of reality and God. He formulated a detailed critique of philosophy and tried to assign philosophy a more limited place besides the teachings of the Quran and mystical insight. 89. Following Al-Ghazali and the end of the classical period, the influence of philosophical inquiry waned. 90. 91. Mullah Sadra, 1571–1636 CE, is often regarded as one of the most influential philosophers of the subsequent period. 92. 93. The increasing influence of Western thought and institutions in the 19th and 20th centuries gave rise to the intellectual movement of Islamic modernism, which aims to understand the relation between traditional Islamic beliefs and modernity. 94. 95. 96. Indian. Main article, Indian philosophy. One of the distinguishing features of Indian philosophy is that it integrates the exploration of the nature of reality, the ways of arriving at knowledge, and the spiritual question of how to reach enlightenment. 97. 98. It started around 900 BCE, when the Vedas were written. They are the foundational scriptures of Hinduism and contemplate issues concerning the relation between the self and ultimate reality as well as the question of how souls are reborn based on their past actions. 99. This period also saw the emergence of non-Vedic teachings, like Buddhism and Jainism. 100. 101. Buddhism was founded by Gautama Siddhartha, 563–483 BCE, who challenged the Vedic idea of a permanent self and proposed a path to liberate oneself from suffering. 100. 101. Jainism was founded by Mahavira, 599–527 BCE, who emphasized nonviolence as well as respect toward all forms of life. 100. 102. 103. The subsequent classical period started roughly 200 BCE and was characterized by the emergence of the six orthodox schools of Hinduism: Nyaya, Vaika, Skaya, Yoga, MMA with Macron, Essay with Macron, and Vedanta. 104, 105, 106. The school of Advaita Vedanta developed later in this period. It was systematized by Adi Shankara, c. 700–750 CE, who held that everything is one and that the impression of a universe consisting of many distinct entities is an illusion. 107, 108, 109. A slightly different perspective was defended by Ramanuj, 1017–1137 CE, A, who founded the school of Vishishtadvaita Vedanta and argued that individual entities are real as aspects or parts of the underlying unity. 111. He also helped to popularize the Bhakti movement, which taught devotion toward the divine as a spiritual path and lasted until the 17th to 18th centuries CE. 112. The modern period began roughly 1800 CE and was shaped by the encounter with Western thought. 113. 114. Various philosophers tried to formulate comprehensive systems to harmonize diverse philosophical and religious teachings. For example, Swami Vivekananda, 1863–1902 CE, used the teachings of Advaita Vedanta to argue that all the different religions are valid paths toward the one divine. 115. Chinese. Main article, Chinese philosophy. Painting of Confucius. The teachings of Confucius on ethics and society shaped subsequent Chinese philosophy. Chinese philosophy is particularly interested in practical questions associated with right social conduct, government, and self-cultivation. 116. In competing attempts to resolve the politically turbulent 6th century BCE, many schools of thought emerged. The most prominent among them were Confucianism and Taoism. 117. 118. Confucianism was founded by Confucius, 551–479 BCE. It focused on different forms of moral virtues and explored how they lead to harmony in society. 119. Taoism was founded by Laozi, 6th century BCE, and examined how humans can live in harmony with nature by following the Tao or the natural order of the universe. 120. Other influential early schools of thought were Mohism, which developed an early form of altruistic consequentialism. 121, 122, 123, and legalism, which emphasized the importance of a strong state and strict laws. 121, 124, 125. Buddhism was introduced to China in the 1st century CE and produced new forms of Buddhism. 126, 127. Starting in the 3rd century CE, the school of Xuanxue emerged. It interpreted earlier Taoist works with a specific emphasis on metaphysical explanations. 126, 127, Neo-Confucianism developed in the 11th century CE. It systematized previous Confucian teachings and sought a metaphysical foundation of ethics. 128, 127, the modern period in Chinese philosophy began in the early 20th century and was shaped by the influence of and reactions to Western philosophy. The emergence of Chinese Marxism, which focused on class struggle, socialism, and communism, resulted in a significant transformation of the political landscape. 129, another development was the emergence of New Confucianism, which aims to modernize and rethink Confucian teachings to explore their compatibility with democratic ideals and modern science. 130, 131, 132. Core branches. See also, Outline of Philosophy, Branches of Philosophy, and Outline of Philosophy, Philosophical schools of thought. Philosophical questions can be grouped into various branches. These groupings allow philosophers to focus on a set of similar topics and interact with other thinkers who are interested in the same questions. Epistemology, ethics, logic, and metaphysics are sometimes listed as the main branches. 133, 134, 135. There are many other subfields besides them, and the different divisions are neither exhaustive nor mutually exclusive. For example, political philosophy, ethics, and aesthetics are sometimes linked under the general heading of value theory as they investigate normative or evaluative aspects. 136. Furthermore, philosophical inquiry sometimes overlaps with other disciplines in the natural and social sciences, religion, and mathematics. 137, 138. Epistemology. Main article, Epistemology. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that studies knowledge. It is also known as theory of knowledge and aims to understand what knowledge is, how it arises, what its limits are, and what value it has. It further examines the nature of truth, belief, justification, and rationality. 139. Some of the questions addressed by epistemologists include: by what methods can one acquire knowledge, how is truth established, and can we prove causal relations? 140. Epistemology is primarily interested in declarative knowledge or knowledge of facts, like knowing that Princess Diana died in 1997. But it also investigates practical knowledge, like knowing how to ride a bicycle, and knowledge by acquaintance, like knowing a celebrity personally. 141, 142, 143. One area in epistemology is the analysis of knowledge. It assumes that declarative knowledge is a combination of different parts and attempts to identify what those parts are. An influential theory in this area claims that knowledge has three components. It is, 1, a belief that is, 2, justified, and 3, true. This theory is controversial, and the difficulties associated with it are known as the Gettier problem. 144, 145. Another area in epistemology asks how people acquire knowledge. Often discussed sources of knowledge are perception, introspection, memory, inference, and testimony. 146, 147. According to empiricists, all knowledge is based on some form of experience. Rationalists reject this view and hold that some forms of knowledge, like innate knowledge, are not acquired through experience. 148, 149, 150. The regress problem is a common issue in relation to the sources of knowledge and the justification they offer. It is based on the idea that beliefs require some kind of reason or evidence to be justified. The problem is that the source of justification may itself be in need of another source of justification. This leads to an infinite regress or circular reasoning. This idea is rejected by foundationalists, who argue that some sources can provide justification without requiring justification themselves. 151, 152. Another solution is presented by coherentists, who state that a belief is justified if it coheres with other beliefs of the person. 153. Many discussions in epistemology touch on the topic of philosophical skepticism, which raises doubts about some or all claims to knowledge. These doubts are often based on the idea that knowledge requires absolute certainty and that humans are unable to acquire it. 154, 155, 156. Ethics, also known as moral philosophy, studies what constitutes right conduct. It is also concerned with the moral evaluation of character traits and institutions. It explores what the standards of morality are and how to live a good life. 158, 159, 160. philosophical ethics addresses such basic questions as are moral obligations relative, which has priority, well-being or obligation, and what gives life meaning. 161. The main branches of ethics are metaethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. Metaethics asks abstract questions about the nature and sources of morality. It analyzes the meaning of ethical concepts, like right action and obligation. It also investigates whether ethical theories can be true in an absolute sense and how to acquire knowledge of them. Normative ethics encompasses general theories of how to distinguish between right and wrong conduct. It helps guide moral decisions by examining what moral obligations and rights people have. Applied ethics studies the consequences of the general theories developed by normative ethics in specific situations, for example, in the workplace or for medical treatments. 162. Within contemporary normative ethics, consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics are influential schools of thought. 163, 164. Consequentialists judge actions based on their consequences. One such view is utilitarianism, which argues that actions should increase overall happiness while minimizing suffering. Deontologists judge actions based on whether they follow moral duties, like abstaining from lying or killing. According to them, what matters is that actions are in tune with those duties and not what consequences they have. Virtue theorists judge actions based on the moral character of the agent who performs them. According to this view, actions should conform to what an ideally virtuous agent would do by manifesting virtues like generosity and honesty. 163, 164, 165. Logic. Main article, Logic. Logic is the study of correct reasoning. It aims to understand how to distinguish good from bad arguments. 166, 167. It is usually divided into formal and informal logic. Formal logic uses artificial languages with a precise symbolic representation to investigate arguments. In this way, it formulates exact criteria and methods based on the structure of arguments to determine whether they are correct or incorrect. Informal logic uses nonformal criteria and standards to analyze and evaluate the correctness of arguments. It relies on additional factors such as content and context. 168. Logic examines a variety of arguments. Deductive arguments are mainly studied by formal logic. An argument is deductively valid if the truth of its premises ensures the truth of its conclusion. Deductively valid arguments follow a rule of inference, like modus ponens, which has the following logical form: P, if P then Q, therefore Q. An example is the argument today is Sunday. If today is Sunday, then I don't have to go to work today, therefore I don't have to go to work today. 169, 170, 171. The premises of non-deductive arguments also support their conclusion. However, this support is not as certain and does not guarantee that the conclusion is true. 172, 173. One form is inductive reasoning. It starts from a set of individual cases and uses generalization to arrive at a universal law governing all cases. An example is the inference that all ravens are black based on observations of many individual black ravens. 174, 175, 176. Another form is abductive reasoning. It starts from an observation and concludes that the best explanation of this observation must be true. This happens, for example, when a doctor diagnoses a disease based on the observed symptoms. 177, 178, 175. Logic also investigates incorrect forms of reasoning. They are called fallacies and are divided into formal and informal fallacies based on whether the source of the error lies only in the form of the argument or also in its content and context. 179. Metaphysics. Main article, Metaphysics. Incunabulum showing the beginning of Aristotle's metaphysics. The beginning of Aristotle's metaphysics in an incunabulum decorated with hand-painted miniatures. Metaphysics is the study of the most general features of reality, such as existence, objects and their properties, wholes and their parts, space and time, events, and causation. 180, 181, 182. There are disagreements about the precise definition of the term and its meaning has changed throughout the ages. 183. Metaphysicists attempt to answer basic questions like why is there something rather than nothing, of what does reality ultimately consist, and are humans free? 184. Metaphysics is sometimes divided into general metaphysics and specific or special metaphysics. General metaphysics investigates being as such. It examines the features that all entities have in common. Specific metaphysics is interested in different kinds of being, the features they have, and how they differ from one another. 180, 181, 185. An important area in metaphysics is ontology. Some theorists identify it with general metaphysics. Ontology investigates concepts like being, becoming, and reality. It studies the categories of being and asks what exists on the most fundamental level. 186. Another subfield of metaphysics is philosophical cosmology. It is interested in the essence of the world as a whole. It asks questions like whether the universe has a beginning and an end and whether it was created by something else. 182, 187. A key topic in metaphysics concerns the question of whether reality only consists of physical things like matter and energy. Alternative suggestions are that mental entities, like souls and experiences, and abstract entities, like numbers, exist apart from physical things. Another topic in metaphysics concerns the problem of identity. It asks questions like how much an entity can change while still remaining the same entity. 182. According to one view, entities have essential and accidental features. They can change their accidental features, but they cease to be the same entity if they lose an essential feature. 188, 189. A central distinction in metaphysics is between particulars and universals. Universals, like the color red, can exist at different locations at the same time. This is not the case for particulars, like individual persons or specific objects. 190, 191. Other metaphysical questions are whether the past fully determines the present and what implications this would have for the existence of free will. 192, 193. There are many additional subfields of philosophy besides its core branches. Some of the most prominent are aesthetics, philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, philosophy of religion, philosophy of science, and political philosophy. 194. Aesthetics in the philosophical sense is the field that studies the nature and appreciation of beauty and other aesthetic properties, like the sublime. 195. Although it is often treated together with the philosophy of art, aesthetics is a broader category that encompasses other aspects of experience, such as natural beauty. 196, 197. In a more general sense, aesthetics is the critical reflection on art, culture, and nature. 198, 199. A key question in aesthetics is whether beauty is an objective or mind-independent feature of entities. This view is rejected by subjectivists, who claim that beauty is not an inherent quality of objects, but depends on how people subjectively experience them. 197, 200. Aesthetic philosophers also investigate the nature of aesthetic experiences and judgments. Further topics include the essence of works of art and the processes involved in creating them. 201, 197. The philosophy of language studies the nature and function of language. It examines the concepts of meaning, reference, and truth. It aims to answer questions like how words are related to things and how language affects human thought and understanding. It is closely related to the disciplines of logic and linguistics. 202, 203, 204. The philosophy of language rose to particular prominence in the early 20th century in analytic philosophy due to the works of Freya and Russell. One of its central topics is to understand how sentences get their meaning. There are two broad theoretical camps, those emphasizing the formal truth conditions of sentences, b, and those investigating circumstances that determine when it is suitable to use a sentence, the latter of which is associated with speech act theory. 206, 207. The philosophy of mind studies the nature of mental phenomena and how they are related to the physical world. 208, 209. It aims to understand different types of conscious and unconscious mental states, like beliefs, desires, intentions, feelings, sensations, and free will. 210, 211. An influential intuition in the philosophy of mind is the distinction between an inner world of experience of an object and the existence of this object in the outer world. The mind-body problem is the problem of explaining how matter and mind are related. The main traditional responses are materialism, which assumes that matter is more fundamental, idealism, which assumes that mind is more fundamental, and dualism, which assumes that mind and matter are distinct types of entities. In contemporary philosophy, a widely accepted position is functionalism, which understands mental states in terms of the functional or causal roles they play. 212, the mind-body problem is closely related to the hard problem of consciousness, which asks how the physical brain can produce qualitatively subjective experiences. 213, 214. The philosophy of religion investigates the basic concepts, assumptions, and arguments associated with religion. It critically reflects on what religion is, how to define the divine, and whether one or more gods exist. It also includes the discussion of worldviews that reject religious doctrines. 215. Further questions addressed by the philosophy of religion are: how are we to interpret religious language, if not literally? Wink with a frown. 216. Is divine omniscience compatible with free will? Wink with a frown. 217. And are the great variety of world religions in some way compatible in spite of their apparently contradictory theological claims? 218. It includes topics from nearly all branches of philosophy. 219. 220. It differs from theology since theological debates typically take place within one religious tradition, while debates in the philosophy of religion transcend any particular set of theological assumptions. 221. 222. The philosophy of science examines the fundamental concepts, assumptions, and problems associated with science. It reflects on what science is and how to distinguish it from pseudoscience. It investigates the methods employed by scientists, how their application can result in knowledge, and on what assumptions they are based. It also studies the purpose and implications of science. 223. Some of its questions are: what counts as an adequate explanation? Wink with a frown. 224. Is a scientific law anything more than a description of a regularity? Wink with a frown. 225. And can some special sciences be explained entirely in the terms of a more general science? 226. It is a vast field that is commonly divided into the philosophy of the natural sciences and the philosophy of the social sciences, with further subdivisions for each of the individual sciences. Under these headings, how these branches are related to one another is also a question in the philosophy of science. Many of its philosophical issues overlap with the fields of metaphysics or epistemology. 227, 228. Political philosophy is the philosophical inquiry into the fundamental principles and ideas governing political systems and societies. It examines the basic concepts, assumptions, and arguments in the field of politics. It investigates the nature and purpose of government and compares its different forms. 229. It further asks under what circumstances the use of political power is legitimate, rather than a form of simple violence. 230. 231. In this regard, it is concerned with the distribution of political power, social and material goods, as well as legal rights. 232. Other topics are justice, liberty, equality, sovereignty, and nationalism. 230. Political philosophy involves a general inquiry into normative matters and differs in this respect from political science, which aims to provide empirical descriptions of actually existing states. 233. 230. Political philosophy is often treated as a subfield of ethics. 234. Influential schools of thought in political philosophy are liberalism, conservatism, socialism, and anarchism. 235. 236. Methods. Main article, Philosophical Methodology. Methods of philosophy are ways of conducting philosophical inquiry. They include techniques for arriving at philosophical knowledge and justifying philosophical claims, as well as principles used for choosing between competing theories. 237, 238, 239. A great variety of methods has been employed throughout the history of philosophy. Many of them differ significantly from the methods used in the natural sciences in that they do not use experimental data obtained through measuring equipment. 240, 241, 242. The choice of one's method usually has important implications both for how philosophical theories are constructed and for the arguments cited for or against them. 243, 244, 245. This choice is often guided by epistemological considerations about what constitutes philosophical evidence. 246, 247, 248. Methodological disagreements can cause conflicts among philosophical theories or about the answers to philosophical questions. The discovery of new methods has often had important consequences both for how philosophers conduct their research and for what claims they defend. 249, 239, 243. some philosophers engage in most of their theorizing using one particular method while others employ a wider range of methods based on which one fits the specific problem investigated best. 250. Conceptual analysis is a common method in analytic philosophy. It aims to clarify the meaning of concepts by analyzing them into their component parts. 251, 49, 252. Another method often employed in analytic philosophy is based on common sense. It starts with commonly accepted beliefs and tries to draw unexpected conclusions from them, which it often employs in a negative sense to criticize philosophical theories that are too far removed from how the average person sees the issue. 242, 253, 254. It is similar to how ordinary language philosophy approaches philosophical questions by investigating how ordinary language is used. 239, 255, 256. Diagram depicting a trolley that is headed towards a group of people. There is an alternate track with only one person and a switch to change tracks. The trolley problem is a thought experiment that investigates the moral difference between doing and allowing harm. This issue is explored in an imaginary situation in which a person can sacrifice a single person by redirecting a trolley in order to save a group of people. 257, 258. Various methods in philosophy give particular importance to intuitions, that is, non-inferential impressions about the correctness of specific claims or general principles. 259, 260. For example, they play an important role in thought experiments, which employ counterfactual thinking to evaluate the possible consequences of an imagined situation. These anticipated consequences can then be used to confirm or refute philosophical theories. 261, 262, 263. The method of reflective equilibrium also employs intuitions. It seeks to form a coherent position on a certain issue by examining all the relevant beliefs and intuitions, some of which often have to be de-emphasized or reformulated in order to arrive at a coherent perspective. 264, 265, 266. Pragmatists stress the significance of concrete practical consequences for assessing whether a philosophical theory is true. 267, 268. According to the pragmatic maxim as formulated by Charles Sanders Peirce, the idea a person has of an object is nothing more than the totality of practical consequences they associate with this object. Pragmatists have also used this method to expose disagreements as merely verbal, that is, to show they make no genuine difference on the level of consequences. 269, 270. Phenomenologists seek knowledge of the realm of appearance and the structure of human experience. They insist upon the first-personal character of all experience and proceed by suspending theoretical judgments about the external world. This technique of phenomenological reduction is known as bracketing or epoche. The goal is to give an unbiased description of the appearances of things. 271. Relation to other fields. Philosophy is closely related to many other fields. It is sometimes understood as a metadiscipline that clarifies their nature and limits. It does this by critically examining their basic concepts, background assumptions, and methods. In this regard, it plays a key role in providing an interdisciplinary perspective. It bridges the gap between different disciplines by analyzing which concepts and problems they have in common. It shows how they overlap while also delimiting their scope. 272. Historically, philosophy is often considered the mother of all sciences since most of the individual sciences formed part of philosophy until they reached their status as autonomous disciplines. 7, 8. The influence of philosophy is felt in various fields that require difficult practical decisions. In medicine, philosophical considerations related to bioethics affect issues like whether an embryo is already a person and under what conditions abortion is morally permissible. A closely related philosophical problem is how humans should treat other animals, for example, whether it is acceptable to use non-human animals as food or for research experiments. 273, 274, 275. In relation to business and professional life, philosophy has contributed by providing ethical frameworks. They contain guidelines on which business practices are morally acceptable and cover the issue of corporate social responsibility. In the field of politics, philosophy addresses issues like how to assess whether a government policy is just. 276, 274. Philosophical inquiry is relevant to many fields that are concerned with what to believe and how to arrive at evidence for one's beliefs. 277. This is a key issue for the sciences, which have as one of their prime objectives the creation of scientific knowledge. Scientific knowledge is based on empirical evidence, but it is often not clear whether empirical observations are neutral or already include theoretical assumptions. A closely related problem is whether the available evidence is sufficient to decide between competing theories. 278, 279. In the fields of theology and religion, there are many doctrines associated with the existence and nature of God as well as rules governing correct behavior. A key issue is whether a rational person should believe these doctrines, for example, whether revelation in the form of holy books and religious experiences of the divine are sufficient evidence for these beliefs. 280, 281, 282. A similar epistemological problem in relation to the law is what counts as evidence and how much evidence is required to find a person guilty of a crime. A related issue in journalism is how to ensure truth and objectivity when reporting on events. 272. Philosophy in the form of logic has been influential in the fields of mathematics and computer science. 283, 284, 285. Further fields influenced by philosophy include psychology, sociology, linguistics, education, and the arts. 286. The close relation between philosophy and other fields in the contemporary period is reflected in the fact that many philosophy graduates go on to work in related fields rather than in philosophy itself. 287. Philosophical ideas have also prepared and shaped changes in the field of politics. For example, ideals formulated in Enlightenment philosophy laid the foundation for constitutional democracy and played a role in the American Revolution and the French Revolution. 288. Marxist philosophy and its exposition of communism was one of the factors in the Russian Revolution and the Chinese Communist Revolution. 289, 290, 291. In India, Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence shaped the Indian independence movement. 292, 293. An example of the cultural and critical role of philosophy is found in its influence on the feminist movement. It has shaped the understanding of key concepts in feminism, for instance, the meaning of gender, how it differs from biological sex, and what role it plays in the formation of personal identity. Philosophers have also investigated the concepts of justice and equality and their implications with respect to the prejudicial treatment of women in male-dominated societies. 294, 295, 296. However, the idea that philosophy is useful for many aspects of life and society is sometimes rejected. According to one such view, philosophy is mainly done for its own sake and does not make significant contributions to existing practices or external goals. 297, 298, 299. See also. Bloodletting or bloodletting is the withdrawal of blood from a patient to prevent or cure illness and disease. Bloodletting, whether by a physician or by leeches, was based on an ancient system of medicine in which blood and other bodily fluids were regarded as humors that had to remain in proper balance to maintain health. It is claimed to have been the most common medical practice performed by surgeons from antiquity until the late 19th century, a span of over 2,000 years. 1. In Europe, the practice continued to be relatively common until the end of the 19th century. 2. The practice has now been abandoned by modern-style medicine for all except a few very specific medical conditions. 3. In the overwhelming majority of cases, the historical use of bloodletting was harmful to patients. 4. Today, the term phlebotomy refers to the drawing of blood for laboratory analysis or blood transfusion. 5. Therapeutic phlebotomy refers to the drawing of a unit of blood in specific cases like hemochromatosis, polycythemia vera, porphyria cutanea tarda, etc., to reduce the number of red blood cells. 6. 7. The traditional medical practice of bloodletting is today considered to be a pseudoscience. 8. In the ancient world. A chart showing the parts of the body to be bled for different diseases, circa 1310 to 1320. Points for bloodletting, Hans von Gersdorff, Field Book of Wound Medicine, 1517. Passages from the Ebers Papyrus may indicate that bloodletting by scarification was an accepted practice in ancient Egypt. 9, 10, 11. Egyptian burials have been reported to contain bloodletting instruments. 12. According to some accounts, the Egyptians based the idea on their observations of the hippopotamus. 13. Confusing its red secretions with blood and believing that it scratched itself to relieve distress. 14, 15. In Greece, bloodletting was in use in the 5th century BC during the lifetime of Hippocrates, who mentions this practice but generally relied on dietary techniques. 16. Erasistratus, however, theorized that many diseases were caused by plethoras, or overabundances, in the blood and advised that these plethoras be treated, initially, by exercise, sweating, reduced food intake, and vomiting. 17. His student Herophilus also opposed bloodletting. But a contemporary Greek physician, Archagathus, one of the first to practice in Rome, did believe in the value of bloodletting. Citation needed. Bleeding a patient to health was modeled on the process of menstruation. Hippocrates believed that menstruation functioned to purge women of bad humors. During the Roman Empire, the Greek physician Galen, who subscribed to the teachings of Hippocrates, advocated physician-initiated bloodletting. 18. The popularity of bloodletting in the classical Mediterranean world was reinforced by the ideas of Galen, after he discovered that not only veins but also arteries were filled with blood, not air as was commonly believed at the time. 19. 20. There were two key concepts in his system of bloodletting. The first was that blood was created and then used up, it did not circulate, and so it could stagnate in the extremities. The second was that humoral balance was the basis of illness or health, the four humors being blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, relating to the four Greek classical elements of air, water, earth, and fire respectively. Galen believed that blood was the dominant humor and the one in most need of control. In order to balance the humors, a physician would either remove excess blood, plethora, from the patient or give them an emetic to induce vomiting, or a diuretic to induce urination. Galen created a complex system of how much blood should be removed based on the patient's age, constitution, the season, the weather and the place. Do-it-yourself bleeding instructions following these systems were developed. 21. Symptoms of plethora were believed to include fever, apoplexy, and headache. The blood to be let was of a specific nature determined by the disease, either arterial or venous, and distant or close to the area of the body affected. He linked different blood vessels with different organs according to their supposed drainage. For example, the vein in the right hand would be let for liver problems and the vein in the left hand for problems with the spleen. The more severe the disease, the more blood would be let. Fevers required copious amounts of bloodletting. Cross-cultural bloodletting. Therapeutic uses of bloodletting were reported in 60 distinct cultures/ethnic groups in the EHRAF database, present in all inhabited continents. Bloodletting is also reported in 15 of the 60 cultures in the Probability Sample Files, PSF, list. 22. The PSF is a subset of EHRAF data that includes only one culture from each of 60 macroculture areas around the world. The prevalence of bloodletting in PSF controls for pseudo-replication linked to common ancestry, suggesting that bloodletting has independently emerged many times. Bloodletting is varied in its practices cross-culturally. For example, in native Alaskan culture bloodletting was practiced for different indications, using different tools, on different body areas, by different people, and it was explained by different medical theories. 23. According to Helena Mighton et al. S. 22, analysis of the EHRAF database and other sources, there are several cross-cultural patterns in bloodletting. Bloodletting is not self-administered. Out of 14 cultures in which the bloodletting practitioner was mentioned, the practitioner was always a third party. 13/14 of the cultures had practitioners with roles related to medicine, while one culture had a practitioner whose role was not related to medicine. Idea of bloodletting removing bad blood that needs to be taken out was common, and was explicitly mentioned in 10/14 cultures studied with detailed descriptions of bloodletting. Bloodletting is not thought to be effective against illness caused supernaturally by humans, e.g. witchcraft. This is surprising, because in most cultures witchcraft and sorcery can be blamed for ailments. 24. But out of 14 cultures with detailed bloodletting descriptions, there was no evidence of bloodletting being used to cure witchcraft-related ailments, while bloodletting was recorded as a cure for ailments of other origins. The Azanda culture has been recorded to believe that bloodletting does not work to cure human-related witchcraft ailments. 25. Bloodletting is usually administered directly to the affected area, e.g. if the patient has a headache, a cut is made on the forehead. Out of 14 cultures with information on the localization of bloodletting, 11 at least sometimes removed blood from the affected area, while 3 specifically removed blood from a different area from the area in pain. Europe is the only continent with more instances of non-colocalized than colocalized bloodletting. In a transmission chain experiment done on people living in the US through Amazon Mechanical Turk, stories about bloodletting in a non-affected area were much more likely to transition into stories about bloodletting being administered near the area in pain than vice versa. 22. This suggests that colocalized bloodletting could be a cultural attractor and is more likely to be culturally transmitted, even among people in the US who are likely more familiar with non-colocalized bloodletting. Bloodletting as a concept is thought to be a cultural attractor, or an intrinsically attractive/culturally transmissible concept. This could explain bloodletting's independent cross-cultural emergence and common cross-cultural traits. 22. Middle Ages. The Talmud recommended a specific day of the week and days of the month for bloodletting in the Shabbat Tractate. 26, and similar rules, though less codified, can be found among Christian writings advising which saints' days were favorable for bloodletting. Citation needed. During medieval times, bleeding charts were common, showing specific bleeding sites on the body in alignment with the planets and zodiacs. 21. Islamic medical authors also advised bloodletting, particularly for fevers. It was practiced according to seasons and certain phases of the moon in the lunar calendar. The practice was probably passed by the Greeks with the translation of ancient texts to Arabic and is different than bloodletting by cupping mentioned in the traditions of Muhammad. When Muslim theories became known in the Latin-speaking countries of Europe, bloodletting became more widespread. Together with cautery, it was central to Arabic surgery. The key texts Kitab al-Kanan and especially al-Tasrif li-Man Ijaza and al-Talif both recommended it. It was also known in Ayurvedic medicine, described in the Susruta Samhita. Used through the 19th century. Ioannis Skulteti, Armamentum Chirurgiae, 1693, diagram transfusion of sheep's blood. A barber surgeon's bloodletting set, beginning of the 19th century, Markisches Museum Berlin. Bloodletting became a main technique of heroic medicine, a traumatic and destructive collection of medical practices that emerged in the 18th century. 27. Even after the humoral system fell into disuse, the practice was continued by surgeons and barber surgeons. Though the bloodletting was often recommended by physicians, it was carried out by barbers. This led to the distinction between physicians and surgeons. The red and white striped pole of the barber shop, still in use today, is derived from this practice. The red symbolizes blood while the white symbolizes the bandages. Bloodletting was used to treat a wide range of diseases, becoming a standard treatment for almost every ailment, and was practiced prophylactically as well as therapeutically. Scarificator. Scarificator mechanism. Scarificator, showing depth adjustment bar. Diagram of scarificator, showing depth adjustment. A number of different methods were employed. The most common was phlebotomy, or venesection, often called breathing a vein, in which blood was drawn from one or more of the larger external veins, such as those in the forearm or neck. In arteriotomy, an artery was punctured, although generally only in the temples. In scarification, not to be confused with scarification, a method of body modification, the superficial vessels were attacked, often using a syringe, a spring-loaded lancet, or a glass cup that contained heated air, producing a vacuum within. See fire cupping. There was also a specific bloodletting tool, called a scarificator, used primarily in 19th century medicine. It has a spring-loaded mechanism with gears that snaps the blades out through slits in the front cover and back in a circular motion. The case is cast brass, and the mechanism and blades steel. One knife bar gear has slipped teeth, turning the blades in a different direction than those on the other bars. The last photo and the diagram show the depth adjustment bar at the back and sides. Leeches could also be used. The withdrawal of so much blood as to induce syncope, fainting, was considered beneficial, and many sessions would only end when the patient began to swoon. William Harvey disproved the basis of the practice in 1628, too, and the introduction of scientific medicine, la méthode numérique, allowed Pierre Charles Alexander Lewis to demonstrate that phlebotomy was entirely ineffective in the treatment of pneumonia and various fevers in the 1830s. Nevertheless, in 1838, a lecturer at the Royal College of Physicians would still state that bloodletting is a remedy which, when judiciously employed, it is hardly possible to estimate too highly, 28, and Lewis was dogged by the sanguinary Bressis, who could recommend leeches 50 at a time. Some physicians resisted Lewis's work because they were not prepared to discard therapies validated by both tradition and their own experience on account of somebody else's numbers. 29. During this era, bloodletting was used to treat almost every disease. One British medical text recommended bloodletting for acne, asthma, cancer, cholera, coma, convulsions, diabetes, epilepsy, gangrene, gout, herpes, indigestion, insanity, jaundice, leprosy, ophthalmia, plague, pneumonia, scurvy, smallpox, stroke, tetanus, tuberculosis, and for some 100 other diseases. Bloodletting was even used to treat most forms of hemorrhaging such as nosebleed, excessive menstruation, or hemorrhoidal bleeding. Before surgery or at the onset of childbirth, blood was removed to prevent inflammation. Before amputation, it was customary to remove a quantity of blood equal to the amount believed to circulate in the limb that was to be removed, 30. There were also theories that bloodletting would cure heartsickness and heartbreak. A French physician, Jacques Ferrand, wrote a book in 1623 on the uses of bloodletting to cure a broken heart. He recommended bloodletting to the point of heart failure, literal. 31. Leeches became especially popular in the early 19th century. In the 1830s, the French imported about 40 million leeches a year for medical purposes, and in the next decade, England imported 6 million leeches a year from France alone. Through the early decades of the century, hundreds of millions of leeches were used by physicians throughout Europe. 32. One typical course of medical treatment began the morning of July 13, 1824. A French sergeant was stabbed through the chest while engaged in single combat. Within minutes, he fainted from loss of blood. Arriving at the local hospital, he was immediately bled 20 ounces, 570 milliliters, to prevent inflammation. During the night he was bled another 24 ounces, 680 milliliters. Early the next morning, the chief surgeon bled the patient another 10 ounces, 285 milliliters. During the next 14 hours, he was bled 5 more times. Medical attendants thus intentionally removed more than half of the patient's normal blood supply in addition to the initial blood loss which caused the sergeant to faint. Bleedings continued over the next several days. By July 29, the wound had become inflamed. The physician applied 32 leeches to the most sensitive part of the wound. Over the next 3 days, there were more bleedings and a total of 40 more leeches. The sergeant recovered and was discharged on October 3. His physician wrote that by the large quantity of blood lost, amounting to 170 ounces, nearly 11 pints, 4.8 liters, besides that drawn by the application of leeches, perhaps another 2 pints, 1.1 liters, the life of the patient was preserved. By 19th century standards, 13 pints of blood taken over the space of a month was a large but not an exceptional quantity. The medical literature of the period contains many similar accounts, some successful, some not. 33. Bloodletting was also popular in the young United States of America, where Benjamin Rush, a signatory of the Declaration of Independence, saw the state of the arteries as the key to disease, recommending levels of bloodletting that were high even for the time. George Washington asked to be bled heavily after he developed a throat infection from weather exposure. Within a 10-hour period, a total of 124 to 126 ounces, 3.75 liters, of blood was withdrawn prior to his death from a throat infection in 1799. 34. One reason for the continued popularity of bloodletting and purging was that, while anatomical knowledge, surgical and diagnostic skills increased tremendously in Europe from the 17th century, the key to curing disease remained elusive, and the underlying belief was that it was better to give any treatment than nothing at all. The psychological benefit of bloodletting to the patient, a placebo effect, may sometimes have outweighed the physiological problems it caused. Bloodletting slowly lost favor during the 19th century, after French physician Dr. Pierre Louis conducted an experiment in which he studied the effect of bloodletting on pneumonia patients. 35. A number of other ineffective or harmful treatments were available as placebos: mesmerism, various processes involving the new technology of electricity, many potions, tonics, and elixirs. Yet, bloodletting persisted during the 19th century partly because it was readily available to people of any socioeconomic status. 36. Barbara Ehrenreich and Deirdre English write that the popularity of bloodletting and heroic medicine in general was because of a need to justify medical billing. Traditional healing techniques had been mostly practiced by women within a non-commercial family or village setting. As male doctors suppressed these techniques, they found it difficult to quantify various amounts of healing to charge for, and difficult to convince patients to pay for it. Because bloodletting seemed active and dramatic, it helped convince patients the doctor had something tangible to sell. 27. Controversy and use into the 20th century. Bloodletting gradually declined in popularity over the course of the 19th century, becoming rather uncommon in most places, before its validity was thoroughly debated. In the medical community of Edinburgh, bloodletting was abandoned in practice before it was challenged in theory, a contradiction highlighted by physician-physiologist John Hughes Bennett, 37. Authorities such as Austin Flint I, Hiram Corson, and William Osler became prominent supporters of bloodletting in the 1880s and onwards, disputing Bennett's premise that bloodletting had fallen into disuse because it did not work. These advocates framed bloodletting as an orthodox medical practice, to be used in spite of its general unpopularity. 38. Some physicians considered bloodletting useful for a more limited range of purposes, such as to clear out infected or weakened blood or its ability to cause hemorrhages to cease, as evidenced in a call for a fair trial for bloodletting as a remedy in 1871. 39. Some researchers used statistical methods for evaluating treatment effectiveness to discourage bloodletting. 35. But at the same time, publications by Philip Pye-Smith and others defended bloodletting on scientific grounds. 38. Bloodletting persisted into the 20th century and was recommended in the 1923 edition of the textbook The Principles and Practice of Medicine. 40. The textbook was originally written by Sir William Osler and continued to be published in new editions under new authors following Osler's death in 1919. 41. Phlebotomy. A physician, American English, medical practitioner, Commonwealth English, medical doctor, or simply doctor, is a health professional who practices medicine, which is concerned with promoting, maintaining, or restoring health through the study, diagnosis, prognosis and treatment of disease, injury, and other physical and mental impairments. Physicians may focus their practice on certain disease categories, types of patients, and methods of treatment known as specialties, or they may assume responsibility for the provision of continuing and comprehensive medical care to individuals, families, and communities known as general practice. 2. Medical practice properly requires both a detailed knowledge of the academic disciplines, such as anatomy and physiology, underlying diseases and their treatment, the science of medicine, and also a decent competence in its applied practice, the art or craft of medicine. Both the role of the physician and the meaning of the word itself vary around the world. Degrees and other qualifications vary widely, but there are some common elements, such as medical ethics requiring that physicians show consideration, compassion, and benevolence for their patients. Modern meanings. The Italian Francesco Redi, considered to be the founder of experimental biology, was the first to recognize and correctly describe details of many important parasites. 3. Specialist in internal medicine. Main article, Internal medicine. Around the world the term physician refers to a specialist in internal medicine or one of its many subspecialties, especially as opposed to a specialist in surgery. This meaning of physician conveys a sense of expertise in treatment by drugs or medications, rather than by the procedures of surgeons. 4. This term is at least 900 years old in English. Physicians and surgeons were once members of separate professions, and traditionally were rivals. The shorter Oxford English Dictionary, 3rd edition, gives a Middle English quotation making this contrast, from as early as 1400, O Lord, whi is it so great difference betwixt a chirurgeon and a physician. 5. Henry VIII granted a charter to the London Royal College of Physicians in 1518. It was not until 1540 that he granted the Company of Barber Surgeons, ancestor of the Royal College of Surgeons, its separate charter. In the same year, the English monarch established the Regius Professorship of Physic at the University of Cambridge. 6. Newer universities would probably describe such an academic as a professor of internal medicine. Hence, in the 16th century, physic meant roughly what internal medicine does now. Currently, a specialist physician in the United States may be described as an internist. Another term, hospitalist, was introduced in 1996. 7. To describe U.S. specialists in internal medicine who work largely or exclusively in hospitals. Such hospitalists now make up about 19% of all U.S. general internists. 8. Who are often called general physicians in Commonwealth countries. This original use, as distinct from surgeon, is common in most of the world including the United Kingdom and other Commonwealth countries, such as Australia, Bangladesh, India, New Zealand, Pakistan, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Zimbabwe, as well as in places as diverse as Brazil, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Japan, Ireland, and Taiwan. In such places, the more general English terms doctor or medical practitioner are prevalent, describing any practitioner of medicine, whom an American would likely call a physician, in the broad sense. 9. In Commonwealth countries, specialist pediatricians and geriatricians are also described as specialist physicians who have subspecialized by age of patient rather than by organ system. Physician and surgeon. Further information: Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery and Doctor of Medicine. Around the world, the combined term physician and surgeon is used to describe either a general practitioner or any medical practitioner irrespective of specialty. 4. 5. This usage still shows the original meaning of physician and preserves the old difference between a physician, as a practitioner of physic, and a surgeon. The term may be used by state medical boards in the United States, and by equivalent bodies in Canadian provinces, to describe any medical practitioner. In modern English, the term physician is used in two main ways, with relatively broad and narrow meanings respectively. This is the result of history and is often confusing. These meanings and variations are explained below. In the United States and Canada, the term physician describes all medical practitioners holding a professional medical degree. The American Medical Association, established in 1847, as well as the American Osteopathic Association, founded in 1897, both currently use the term physician to describe members. However, the American College of Physicians, established in 1915, does not. Its title uses physician in its original sense. American physicians. The vast majority of physicians trained in the United States have a Doctor of Medicine degree, and use the initials MD. A smaller number attend osteopathic medical schools and have a Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine degree and use the initials D.O. 10. The World Directory of Medical Schools lists both MD and DO granting schools as medical schools located in the United States. After completion of medical school, physicians complete a residency in the specialty in which they will practice. Subspecialties require the completion of a fellowship after residency. Both MD and DO physicians participate in the National Resident Matching Program, NRMP, and attend ACGME-accredited residencies and fellowships across all medical specialties to obtain licensure. All boards of certification now require that physicians demonstrate, by examination, continuing mastery of the core knowledge and skills for a chosen specialty. Recertification varies by particular specialty between every 7 and every 10 years. Primary care. Primary care physicians guide patients in preventing disease and detecting health problems early while they are still treatable. 11. They are divided into two types: family medicine doctors and internal medicine doctors. 12. Family doctors, or family physicians, are trained to care for patients of any age, while internists are trained to care for adults. 13. Family doctors receive training in a variety of care and are therefore also referred to as general practitioners. 14. Family medicine grew out of the general practitioner movement of the 1960s in response to the growing specialization in medicine that was seen as threatening to the doctor-patient relationship and continuity of care. 15. Podiatry. In the United States, the American Podiatric Medical Association, APMA, defines podiatrists as physicians and surgeons who treat the foot, ankle, and associated structures of the leg. 16. Podiatrists undergo training with the Doctor of Podiatric Medicine, DPM, degree. 17. The American Medical Association, AMA, however, advocates for the definition of a physician as an individual possessing degree of either a Doctor of Medicine or Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. 18. In the U.S., podiatrists are required to complete 3 to 4 years of podiatry residency upon graduating with a DPM degree. After residency, 1 to 2 years of fellowship programs are available in plastic surgery, foot and ankle reconstructive surgery, sports medicine, and wound care. 19. Podiatry residencies and/or fellowships are not accredited by the ACGME. The overall scope of podiatric practice varies from state to state and is not similar to that of physicians holding an MD or DO degree. 20. DPM is also available at one Canadian university, namely the Université du Québec à Trois-Rivières. Students are typically required to complete an internship in New York prior to obtaining their professional degree. The World Directory of Medical Schools does not list U.S. or Canadian schools of podiatric medicine as medical schools and only lists U.S.-granted MD, DO, and Canadian MD programs as medical schools for the respective regions. Shortage. Main article, Physician Supply. Medical doctors per 1,000 people in 2018, 21. Many countries in the developing world have the problem of too few physicians. In 2015, the Association of American Medical Colleges warned that the U.S. will face a doctor shortage of as many as 90,000 by 2025. 22. Social Role and Worldview. Main articles: Medical Anthropology and History of Medicine. Biomedicine. Within Western culture and over recent centuries, medicine has become increasingly based on scientific reductionism and materialism. This style of medicine is now dominant throughout the industrialized world, and is often termed biomedicine by medical anthropologists. 23. Biomedicine formulates the human body and disease in a culturally distinctive pattern, 24, and is a worldview learned by medical students. Within this tradition, the medical model is a term for the complete set of procedures in which all doctors are trained, 25, including mental attitudes. A particularly clear expression of this worldview, currently dominant among conventional physicians, is evidence-based medicine. Within conventional medicine, most physicians still pay heed to their ancient traditions. The critical sense and skeptical attitude of the citation of medicine from the shackles of priestcraft and of caste. Secondly, the conception of medicine as an art based on accurate observation, and as a science, an integral part of the science of man and of nature. Thirdly, the high moral ideals, expressed in that most memorable of human documents, Gompers, the Hippocratic Oath. And fourthly, the conception and realization of medicine as the profession of a cultivated gentleman. Sir William Osler, Chauvinism in Medicine, 1902, 26. In this Western tradition, physicians are considered to be members of a learned profession, and enjoy high social status, often combined with expectations of a high and stable income and job security. However, medical practitioners often work long and inflexible hours, with shifts at unsociable times. Their high status is partly from their extensive training requirements, and also because of their occupation's special ethical and legal duties. The term traditionally used by physicians to describe a person seeking their help is the word patient, although one who visits a physician for a routine checkup may also be so described. This word patient is an ancient reminder of medical duty, as it originally meant one who suffers. The English noun comes from the Latin word patiens, the present participle of the deponent verb, patir, meaning I am suffering, and akin to the Greek verb pi sigma chi epsilon iota nu, romanized, paschine, lit. To suffer, and its cognate noun pi theta omicron, pathos, suffering. 5, 27. Physicians in the original, narrow sense, specialist physicians or internists, see above, are commonly members or fellows of professional organizations, such as the American College of Physicians or the Royal College of Physicians in the United Kingdom, and such hard-won membership is itself a mark of status. Citation needed. Alternative medicine. While contemporary biomedicine has distanced itself from its ancient roots in religion and magic, many forms of traditional medicine, 28, and alternative medicine continue to espouse vitalism in various guises. As long as life had its own secret properties, it was possible to have sciences and medicines based on those properties. 29. The U.S. National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, NCCAM, classifies complementary and alternative medicine therapies into 5 categories or domains, including frowny face 30, alternative medical systems, or complete systems of therapy and practice, mind-body interventions, or techniques designed to facilitate the mind's effect on bodily functions and symptoms, biologically based systems including herbalism, and manipulative and body-based methods such as chiropractic and massage therapy. In considering these alternate traditions that differ from biomedicine, see above, medical anthropologists emphasize that all ways of thinking about health and disease have a significant cultural content, including conventional Western medicine. 23, 24, 31, 32. Ayurveda, Unani medicine, and homeopathy are popular types of alternative medicine. Physicians' own health. Some commentators have argued that physicians have duties to serve as role models for the general public in matters of health, for example by not smoking cigarettes. 33. Indeed, in most Western nations relatively few physicians smoke, and their professional knowledge does appear to have a beneficial effect on their health and lifestyle. According to a study of male physicians, 34, life expectancy is slightly higher for physicians, 73 years for white and 69 years for black, than lawyers or many other highly educated professionals. Causes of death which are less likely to occur in physicians than the general population include respiratory disease, including pneumonia, pneumoconiosis, COPD, but excluding emphysema and other chronic airway obstruction, alcohol-related deaths, rectosigmoid and anal cancers, and bacterial diseases. 34. Physicians do experience exposure to occupational hazards, and there is a well-known aphorism that doctors make the worst patients. 35. Causes of death that are shown to be higher in the physician population include suicide among doctors and self-inflicted injury, drug-related causes, traffic accidents, and cerebrovascular and ischemic heart disease. 34. Physicians are also prone to occupational burnout. This manifests as a long-term stress reaction characterized by poorer quality of care towards patients, emotional exhaustion, a feeling of decreased personal achievement, and others. A study by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality reported that time pressure was the greatest cause of burnout. A survey from the American Medical Association reported that more than half of all respondents chose too many bureaucratic tasks as the leading cause of burnout. 36. 37. Education and training. Main article, Medical Education. Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami, the primary teaching hospital for the Leonard M. Miller School of Medicine at the University of Miami, July 2010. Medical education and career pathways for doctors vary considerably across the world. All medical practitioners. In all developed countries, entry-level medical education programs are tertiary-level courses, undertaken at a medical school attached to a university. Depending on jurisdiction and university, entry may follow directly from secondary school or require prerequisite undergraduate education. The former commonly takes 5 or 6 years to complete. Programs that require previous undergraduate education, typically a 3 or 4-year degree, often in science, are usually 4 or 5 years in length. Hence, gaining a basic medical degree may typically take from 5 to 8 years, depending on jurisdiction and university. Following the completion of entry-level training, newly graduated medical practitioners are often required to undertake a period of supervised practice before full registration is granted, typically 1 or 2 years. This may be referred to as an internship, as the foundation years in the UK, or as conditional registration. Some jurisdictions, including the United States, require residencies for practice. Medical practitioners hold a medical degree specific to the university from which they graduated. This degree qualifies the medical practitioner to become licensed or registered under the laws of that particular country, and sometimes of several countries, subject to requirements for an internship or conditional registration. Specialists in internal medicine. Specialty training is begun immediately following completion of entry-level training or even before. In other jurisdictions, junior medical doctors must undertake generalist, unstreamed, training for 1 or more years before commencing specialization. Hence, depending on the jurisdiction, a specialist physician, internist, often does not achieve recognition as a specialist until 12 or more years after commencing basic medical training, 5 to 8 years at university to obtain a basic medical qualification, and up to another 9 years to become a specialist. Regulation. In most jurisdictions, physicians, in either sense of the word, need government permission to practice. Such permission is intended to promote public safety, and often to protect government spending, as medical care is commonly subsidized by national governments. In some jurisdictions such as in Singapore, it is common for physicians to inflate their qualifications with the title DR in correspondence or name cards, even if their qualifications are limited to a basic, example, bachelor level, degree. In other countries such as Germany, only physicians holding an academic doctorate may call themselves doctor. On the other hand, the European Research Council has decided that the German medical doctorate does not meet the international standards of a PhD research degree. Dubious. Discuss. 38, 39. All medical practitioners. Among the English-speaking countries, this process is known either as licensure as in the United States, or as registration in the United Kingdom, other Commonwealth countries, and Ireland. Synonyms in use elsewhere include collegiation in Spain, Ishimenkyo in Japan, Autorasastion in Norway, approbation in Germany, and delta epsilon iota alpha epsilon rho gamma alpha sigma alpha in Greece. In France, Italy and Portugal, civilian physicians must be members of the Order of Physicians to practice medicine. In some countries, including the United Kingdom and Ireland, the profession largely regulates itself, with the government affirming the regulating body's authority. The best-known example of this is probably the General Medical Council of Britain. In all countries, the regulating authorities will revoke permission to practice in cases of malpractice or serious misconduct. In the large English-speaking federations, United States, Canada, Australia, the licensing or registration of medical practitioners is done at a state or provincial level, or nationally as in New Zealand. Australian states usually have a medical board, which has now been replaced by the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, AHPRA, in most states, while Canadian provinces usually have a College of Physicians and Surgeons. All American states have an agency that is usually called the Medical Board, although there are alternate names such as Board of Medicine, Board of Medical Examiners, Board of Medical Licensure, Board of Healing Arts or some other variation. 40. After graduating from a first professional school, physicians who wish to practice in the U.S. usually take standardized exams, such as the USMLE for a doctor in medicine. Specialists in internal medicine. Most countries have some method of officially recognizing specialist qualifications in all branches of medicine, including internal medicine. Sometimes, this aims to promote public safety by restricting the use of hazardous treatments. Other reasons for regulating specialists may include standardization of recognition for hospital employment and restriction on which practitioners are entitled to receive higher insurance payments for specialist services. Performance and professionalism supervision. The issue of medical errors, drug abuse, and other issues in physician professional behavior received significant attention across the world. 41, in particular following a critical 2000 report, 42, which arguably launched the patient safety movement. 43, in the U.S., as of 2006 there were few organizations that systematically monitored performance. In the U.S., only the Department of Veterans Affairs randomly drug tests physicians, in contrast to drug testing practices for other professions that have a major impact on public welfare. Licensing boards at the U.S. state level depend upon continuing education to maintain competence. 44, through the utilization of the National Practitioner Data Bank, Federation of State Medical Boards Disciplinary Report, and American Medical Association Physician Profile Service. The 67 state medical boards continually self-report any adverse/disciplinary actions taken against a licensed physician in order that the other medical boards in which the physician holds or is applying for a medical license will be properly notified so that corrective, reciprocal action can be taken against the offending physician. 45. In Europe, as of 2009 the health systems are governed according to various national laws, and can also vary according to regional differences similar to the United States. 46. See also. Icon Medicine Portal. AI Doctor. Doctor's Office. Doctor-patient relationship. Occupations of physicians and surgeons. International medical graduate. List of countries and dependencies by number of physicians. List of medical schools. List of physicians. Medic. Physician-scientist. Physicians in Canada. Hemorism, the humoral theory, or humoralism, was a system of medicine detailing a supposed makeup and workings of the human body, adopted by ancient Greek and Roman physicians and philosophers. Humorism began to fall out of favor in the 17th century and it was definitively disproved in the 1850s with the advent of germ theory, which was able to show that many diseases previously thought to be humoral were in fact caused by microbes. Origin. See also, Ancient Greek medicine. The concept of humors, chemical systems regulating human behavior, became more prominent from the writing of medical theorist Alcmaeon of Croton, c. 540 to 500 BC. His list of humors was longer and included fundamental elements described by Empedocles, such as water, earth, fire, air, etc. The concept of humors may have origins in ancient Egyptian medicine, 1, or Mesopotamia, 2, though it was not systemized until ancient Greek thinkers. The word humor is a translation of Greek chi-upsilon mu, 3, chymos, literally juice or sap, metaphorically flavor. Early texts on Indian Ayurveda medicine presented a theory of 3 humors, doas, 4, which they sometimes linked with the 5 elements, Panchabutta earth, water, fire, air, and space, 5. Hippocrates is usually credited with applying this idea to medicine. In contrast to Alcmaeon, Hippocrates suggested that humors are the vital bodily fluids, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Alcmaeon and Hippocrates posited that an extreme excess or deficiency of any of the humors, bodily fluid, in a person can be a sign of illness. Hippocrates, and then Galen, suggested that a moderate imbalance in the mixture of these fluids produces behavioral patterns. 6. One of the treatises attributed to Hippocrates, On the Nature of Man, describes the theory as follows. The human body contains blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These are the things that make up its constitution and cause its pains and health. Health is primarily that state in which these constituent substances are in the correct proportion to each other, both in strength and quantity, and are well mixed. Pain occurs when one of the substances presents either a deficiency or an excess, or is separated in the body and not mixed with others. 7. The body depends heavily on the four humors because their balanced combination helps to keep people in good health. Having the right amount of humor is essential for health. The pathophysiology of disease is consequently brought on by humor excesses and/or deficiencies. 8. The existence of fundamental biochemical substances and structural components in the body remains a compellingly shared point with Hippocratic beliefs, despite the fact that current science has moved away from those four Hippocratic humors. 8. Although the theory of the four humors does appear in some Hippocratic texts, other Hippocratic writers accepted the existence of only two humors, while some refrained from discussing the humoral theory at all. 9. Hemorism, or the doctrine of the four temperaments, as a medical theory retained its popularity for centuries, largely through the influence of the writings of Galen, 129–201 AD. The four essential elements, humors, that make up the human body, according to Hippocrates, are in harmony with one another and act as a catalyst for preserving health. 8. Hippocrates' theory of four humors was linked with the popular theory of the four elements, earth, fire, water, and air, proposed by Empedocles, but this link was not proposed by Hippocrates or Galen, who referred primarily to bodily fluids. While Galen thought that humors were formed in the body, rather than ingested, he believed that different foods had varying potential to act upon the body to produce different humors. Warm foods, for example, tended to produce yellow bile, while cold foods tended to produce phlegm. Seasons of the year, periods of life, geographic regions, and occupations also influenced the nature of the humors formed. As such, certain seasons and geographic areas were understood to cause imbalances in the humors, leading to varying types of disease across time and place. For example, cities exposed to hot winds were seen as having higher rates of digestive problems as a result of excess phlegm running down from the head, while cities exposed to cold winds were associated with diseases of the lungs, acute diseases, and hardness of the bowels, as well as ophthalmies, issues of the eyes, and nosebleeds. Cities to the west, meanwhile, were believed to produce weak, unhealthy, pale people that were subject to all manners of disease. 10. In the treatise, on airs, waters, and places, a Hippocratic physician is described arriving to an unnamed city where they test various factors of nature including the wind, water, and soil to predict the direct influence on the diseases specific to the city based on the season and the individual. 11. A fundamental idea of Hippocratic medicine was the endeavor to pinpoint the origins of illnesses in both the physiology of the human body and the influence of potentially hazardous environmental variables like air, water, and nutrition, and every humor has a distinct composition and is secreted by a different organ. 12. Aristotle's concept of eucrasia, a state resembling equilibrium, and its relationship to the right balance of the four humors allow for the maintenance of human health, offering a more mathematical approach to medicine. 12. The four humors as depicted in an 18th-century woodcut, phlegmatic, choleric, sanguine and melancholic. The imbalance of humors, or dyscrasia, was thought to be the direct cause of all diseases. Health was associated with a balance of humors, or eucrasia. The qualities of the humors, in turn, influenced the nature of the diseases they caused. Yellow bile caused warm diseases and phlegm caused cold diseases. In On the Temperaments, Galen further emphasized the importance of the qualities. An ideal temperament involved a proportionally balanced mixture of the four qualities. Galen identified four temperaments in which one of the qualities, warm, cold, moist, or dry, predominated, and four more in which a combination of two, warm and moist, warm and dry, or cold and moist, dominated. These last four, named for the humors with which they were associated, sanguine, choleric, melancholic and phlegmatic, eventually became better known than the others. While the term temperament came to refer just to psychological dispositions, Galen used it to refer to bodily dispositions, which determined a person's susceptibility to particular diseases, as well as behavioral and emotional inclinations. Disease could also be the result of the corruption of one or more of the humors, which could be caused by environmental circumstances, dietary changes, or many other factors. 13. These deficits were thought to be caused by vapors inhaled or absorbed by the body. Greeks and Romans, and the later Muslim and Western European medical establishments that adopted and adapted classical medical philosophy, believed that each of these humors would wax and wane in the body, depending on diet and activity. When a patient was suffering from a surplus or imbalance of one of the four humors, then said patient's personality and/or physical health could be negatively affected. Therefore, the goal of treatment was to rid the body of some of the excess humor through techniques like purging, bloodletting, catharsis, diuresis, and others. Bloodletting was already a prominent medical procedure by the 1st century, but venesection took on even more significance once Galen of Pergamum declared blood to be the most prevalent humor. 14. The volume of blood extracted ranged from a few drops to several liters over the course of several days, depending on the patient's condition and the doctor's practice. 15. 4 humors. Even though hemorism theory had several models that used 2, 3, and 5 components, the most famous model consists of the 4 humors described by Hippocrates and developed further by Galen. The 4 humors of Hippocratic medicine are black bile, Greek, mu lambda alpha iota nu alpha chi omicron lambda, melena chol, yellow bile, Greek, xi alpha nu theta chi omicron lambda, xantha chol, phlegm, Greek, phi lambda gamma mu alpha, phlegma, and blood, Greek, alpha mu alpha, hyma. Each corresponds to one of the traditional 4 temperaments. Based on Hippocratic medicine, it was believed that for a body to be healthy, the 4 humors should be balanced in amount and strength. 16. The proper blending and balance of the 4 humors was known as eucrasia. 17. Hemorism theory was improved by Galen, who incorporated his understanding of the humors into his interpretation of the human body. He believed the interactions of the humors within the body were the key to investigating the physical nature and function of the organ systems. Galen combined his interpretation of the humors with his collection of ideas concerning nature from past philosophers in order to find conclusions about how the body works. For example, Galen maintained the idea of the presence of the Platonic tripartite soul, which consisted of thumos, spiritedness, epithumos, directed spiritedness, i.e. desire, and sophia, wisdom. 18. Through this, Galen found a connection between these 3 parts of the soul and the 3 major organs that were recognized at the time: the brain, the heart, and the liver. 18. This idea of connecting vital parts of the soul to vital parts of the body was derived from Aristotle's sense of explaining physical observations, and Galen utilized it to build his view of the human body. The organs, named organa, had specific functions, called chriai, that contributed to the maintenance of the human body, and the expression of these functions is shown in characteristic activities, called energiae, of a person. 19. While the correspondence of parts of the body to the soul was an influential concept, Galen decided that the interaction of the 4 humors with natural bodily mechanisms were responsible for human development, and this connection inspired his understanding of the nature of the components of the body. Galen recalls the correspondence between humors and seasons in his On the Doctrines of Hippocrates and Plato, and says that, as for ages and the seasons, the child, pi alpha, corresponds to spring, the young man, nu epsilon alpha nu sigma kappa omicron, to summer, the mature man, pi alpha rho alpha kappa zeta omega nu, to autumn, and the old man, gamma rho omega nu, to winter. 20. He also related a correspondence between humors and seasons based on the properties of both. Blood, as a humor, was considered hot and wet. This gave it a correspondence to spring. Yellow bile was considered hot and dry, which related it to summer. Black bile was considered cold and dry, and thus related to autumn. Phlegm, cold and wet, was related to winter. 21. Galen also believed that the characteristics of the soul follow the mixtures of the body, but he did not apply this idea to the Hippocratic humors. He believed that phlegm did not influence character. In his On Hippocrates the Nature of Man, Galen stated, sharpness and intelligence, xi kappa alpha sigma upsilon nu epsilon tau nu, are caused by yellow bile in the soul, perseverance and consistency, delta rho alpha omicron nu kappa alpha beta beta alpha iota omicron nu, by the melancholic humor, and simplicity and naivety, pi lambda omicron nu kappa alpha lambda iota theta iota tau epsilon rho omicron nu, by blood. But the nature of phlegm has no effect on the character of the soul. Tau omicron delta phi lambda gamma alpha tau omicron phi sigma iota epsilon nu theta omicron pi omicron iota alpha nu chi rho eta sigma tau omicron. 22. He further said that blood is a mixture of the 4 elements: water, air, fire, and earth. These terms only partly correspond to modern medical terminology, in which there is no distinction between black and yellow bile, and phlegm has a very different meaning. It was believed that the humors were the basic substances from which all liquids in the body were made. Robin Farias, 1921, a Swedish physician who devised the erythrocyte sedimentation rate, suggested that the four humors were based upon the observation of blood clotting in a transparent container. When blood is drawn in a glass container and left undisturbed for about an hour, four different layers can be seen. A dark clot forms at the bottom, the black bile. Above the clot is a layer of red blood cells, the blood. Above this is a whitish layer of white blood cells, the phlegm. The top layer is clear yellow serum, the yellow bile. 23. Many Greek texts were written during the golden age of the theory of the four humors in Greek medicine after Galen. One of those texts was an anonymous treatise called On the Constitution of the Universe and of Man, published in the mid-19th century by J. L. Ideler. In this text, the author establishes the relationship between elements of the universe, air, water, earth, fire, and elements of the man, blood, yellow bile, black bile, phlegm. 24. He said that the people who have red blood are friendly. They joke and laugh about their bodies, and they are rose-tinted, slightly red, and have pretty skin. The people who have yellow bile are bitter, short-tempered, and daring. They appear greenish and have yellow skin. The people who are composed of black bile are lazy, fearful, and sickly. They have black hair and black eyes. Those who have phlegm are low-spirited, forgetful, and have white hair. 17th century English playwright Ben Jonson wrote humor plays, where character types were based on their humoral complexion. Blood. It was thought that the nutritional value of the blood was the source of energy for the body and the soul. Blood was believed to consist of small proportional amounts of the other three humors. This meant that taking a blood sample would allow for determination of the balance of the four humors in the body. 25. It was associated with a sanguine nature, enthusiastic, active, and social. 26, 27, 103-05. The seasonal association of blood is the spring because the natural characteristics, partially true, found in individuals was associated with being hot and wet. 28. Yellow bile. Yellow bile was associated with a choleric nature, ambitious, decisive, aggressive, and short-tempered. 29. It was thought to be fluid found within the gallbladder, or in excretions such as vomit and feces. 25. The associated qualities for yellow bile are hot and dry with the natural association of summer and fire. It was believed that an excess of this humor in an individual would result in emotional irregularities such as increased anger or behaving irrationally. 30. Black bile. Black bile was associated with a melancholy nature, the word melancholy itself deriving from the Greek for black bile, mu lambda alpha iota nu alpha chi omicron lambda, melena col. Depression was attributed to excess or unnatural black bile secreted by the spleen. 31. Cancer was also attributed to an excess of black bile concentrated in a specific area. 32. The seasonal association of black bile was to autumn as the cold and dry characteristics of the season reflect the nature of man. 28. Phlegm. Phlegm was associated with a phlegmatic nature, thought to be associated with reserved behavior. 33. The phlegm of Hemorism is far from phlegm as it is defined today. Phlegm was used as a general term to describe white or colorless secretions such as pus, mucus, saliva, sweat, or semen. 25. Phlegm was also associated with the brain, possibly due to the color and consistency of brain tissue. 25. The French physiologist and Nobel laureate Charles Richet, when describing Hemorism's phlegm or pituitary secretion in 1910, asked rhetorically, "This strange liquid, which is the cause of tumors, of chlorosis, of rheumatism, and cachexia, where is it? Who will ever see it? Who has ever seen it? What can we say of this fanciful classification of humors into four groups, of which two are absolutely imaginary?" 34. The seasonal association of phlegm is winter due to the natural properties of being cold and wet. 35. Humor production. Humors were believed to be produced via digestion as the final products of hepatic digestion. Digestion is a continuous process taking place in every animal, and it can be divided into four sequential stages. 36. The gastric digestion stage, the hepatic digestion stage, the vascular digestion stage, and the tissue digestion stage. Each stage digests food until it becomes suitable for use by the body. In gastric digestion, food is made into chylus, which is suitable for the liver to absorb and carry on digestion. Chylus is changed into chymus in the hepatic digestion stage. Chymus is composed of the four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These four humors then circulate in the blood vessels. In the last stage of digestion, tissue digestion, food becomes similar to the organ tissue for which it is destined. If anything goes wrong leading up to the production of humors, there will be an imbalance leading to disease. Proper organ functioning is necessary in the production of good humor. The stomach and liver also have to function normally for proper digestion. If there are any abnormalities in gastric digestion, the liver, blood vessels, and tissues cannot be provided with the raw chylus, which can cause abnormal humor and blood composition. A healthy functioning liver is not capable of converting abnormal chylus into normal chylus and normal humors. Humors are the end product of gastric digestion, but they are not the end product of the digestion cycle, so an abnormal humor produced by hepatic digestion will affect other digestive organs. Relation to jaundice. According to Hippocratic humoral theory, jaundice is present in the Hippocratic corpus. Some of the first descriptions of jaundice come from the Hippocratic physicians, Icterus. 37. The ailment appears multiple times in the Hippocratic corpus, where its genesis, description, prognosis, and therapy are given. The 5 kinds of jaundice mentioned in the Hippocratic corpus all share a yellow or greenish skin color. 37. A modern doctor will undoubtedly start to think of the symptoms listed in contemporary atlases of medicine after reading the clinical symptoms of each variety of jaundice listed in the Hippocratic corpus. Despite the fact that the Hippocratic physicians' therapeutic approaches have little to do with contemporary medical practice, nonetheless, their capacity for observation as they describe the various forms of jaundice is remarkable. 37. In the Hippocratic corpus, the Hippocratic physicians make multiple references to jaundice. At that time, jaundice was viewed as an illness unto itself rather than a symptom brought on by a disease. 37. Unification with Empedocles' model. Empedocles' theory suggested that there are 4 elements, earth, fire, water, and air, with the earth producing the natural systems. Since this theory was influential for centuries, later scholars paired qualities associated with each humor as described by Hippocrates/Galen with seasons and basic elements as described by Empedocles. 38. The following table shows the 4 humors with their corresponding elements, seasons, sites of formation, and resulting temperaments. Frowny face. 39. Humor, season, age, element, organ, temperaments. Blood, spring, infancy, air, liver, warm and moist, sanguine. Yellow bile, summer, youth, fire, gallbladder, warm and dry, choleric. Black bile, autumn, adulthood, earth, spleen, cold and dry, melancholic. Phlegm, winter, old age, water, brain/lungs, cold and moist, phlegmatic. Influence and legacy. Islamic medicine. See also, medicine in medieval Islam and Inani. Medieval medical tradition. In the Golden Age of Islam adopted the theory of Hemorism from Greco-Roman medicine, notably via the Persian polymath Avicenna's The Canon of Medicine, 1025. Avicenna summarized the 4 humors and temperaments as follows. Frowny face. 40. Avicenna's, Ibn Sina, 4 humors and temperaments. Evidence: hot, cold, moist, dry. Morbid states, inflammations become febrile fevers related to serious humor, rheumatism, lassitude, loss of vigor. Functional power deficient, energy deficient, digestive power, difficult digestion. Subjective sensations, bitter taste, excessive thirst, burning at cardiac, lack of desire for fluids, mucoid, salivation, sleepiness, insomnia, wakefulness. Physical signs: high pulse rate, lassitude, flaccid joints, diarrhea, swollen eyelids, rough skin, acquired habit, rough skin, acquired habit. Foods and medicines: caliphatients, harmful, infrigidants. 41, beneficial, infrigidants, harmful, caliphatients, beneficial, moist articles, harmful, dry regimen, harmful, humectants, beneficial. Relation to weather: worse in summer, worse in winter, bad in autumn. Perso-Arabic and Indian medicine. The Inani school of medicine, practiced in Perso-Arabic countries, India, and Pakistan, is based on Galenic and Avicennian medicine in its emphasis on the 4 humors as a fundamental part of the methodologic paradigm. Western medicine. This section needs additional citations for verification. Please help improve this article by adding citations to reliable sources in this section. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. July 2022, learn how and when to remove this template message. The humoralist system of medicine was highly individualistic, for all patients were said to have their own unique humoral composition. 42. From Hippocrates onward, the humoral theory was adopted by Greek, Roman and Islamic physicians, and dominated the view of the human body among European physicians until at least 1543, when it was first seriously challenged by Andreas Vesalius, who mostly criticized Galen's theories of human anatomy and not the chemical hypothesis of behavioral regulation. Temperament. The four humors and their qualities. Typical 18th-century practices such as bleeding a sick person or applying hot cups to a person were based on the humoral theory of imbalances of fluids, blood and bile in those cases. Methods of treatment like bloodletting, emetics and purges were aimed at expelling a surplus of a humor. 43. Apocrystics were medications intended to stop the flux of malignant humors to a diseased body part. 44. 16th-century Swiss physician Paracelsus further developed the idea that beneficial medical substances could be found in herbs, minerals and various alchemical combinations thereof. These beliefs were the foundation of mainstream Western medicine well into the 17th century. Specific minerals or herbs were used to treat ailments simple to complex, from an uncomplicated upper respiratory infection to the plague. For example, chamomile was used to decrease heat and lower excessive bile humor. Arsenic was used in a poultice bag to draw out the excess humors that led to symptoms of the plague. Apophlegmatisms, in pre-modern medicine, were medications chewed in order to draw away phlegm and humors. Although advances in cellular pathology and chemistry criticized humoralism by the 17th century, the theory had dominated Western medical thinking for more than 2,000 years. 45, 46, only in some instances did the theory of humoralism wane into obscurity. One such instance occurred in the 6th and 7th centuries in the Byzantine Empire when traditional secular Greek culture gave way to Christian influences. Though the use of humoralist medicine continued during this time, its influence was diminished in favor of religion. 47. The revival of Greek humoralism, owing in part to changing social and economic factors, did not begin until the early 9th century. 48. Use of the practice in modern times is pseudoscience. 49. Modern use. Humoral theory was the grand unified theory of medicine, before the invention of modern medicine, for more than 2,000 years. The theory was one of the fundamental tenets of the teachings of the Greek physician-philosopher Hippocrates, 460 to 370 BC, who is regarded as the first practitioner of medicine, appropriately referred to as the father of modern medicine. 50. With the advent of the doctrine of specific etiology, the humoral theory's demise hastened even further. This demonstrates that there is only one precise cause and one specific issue for each and every sickness or disorder that has been diagnosed. 50. Additionally, the identification of messenger molecules like hormones, growth factors, and neurotransmitters suggests that the humoral theory has not yet been made fully moribund. Humoral theory is still present in modern medical terminology, which refers to humoral immunity when discussing elements of immunity that circulate in the bloodstream, such as hormones and antibodies. 50. Modern medicine refers to humoral immunity or humoral regulation when describing substances such as hormones and antibodies, but this is not a remnant of the humor theory. It is merely a literal use of humoral, i.e., pertaining to bodily fluids, such as blood and lymph. The concept of hemorism was not definitively disproven until 1858. 45, 46. There were no studies performed to prove or disprove the impact of dysfunction in known bodily organs producing named fluids, humors, on temperament traits simply because the list of temperament traits was not defined up until the end of the 20th century. Culture. Theophrastus and others developed a set of characters based on the humors. Those with too much blood were sanguine. Those with too much phlegm were phlegmatic. Those with too much yellow bile were choleric, and those with too much black bile were melancholic. The idea of human personality based on humors contributed to the character comedies of Menander and, later, Plautus. Through the neoclassical revival in Europe, the humor theory dominated medical practice, and the theory of humoral types made periodic appearances in drama. The humors were an important and popular iconographic theme in European art, found in paintings, tapestries, 51, and sets of prints. The humors can be found in Elizabethan works, such as in The Taming of the Shrew, in which the character Petruchio, a choleric man, uses humoral therapy techniques on Katrina, a choleric woman, in order to tame her into the socially acceptable phlegmatic woman. 52. Some examples include, he yells at the servants for serving mutton, a choleric food, to two people who are already choleric. He deprives Katrina of sleep, and he, Katrina and their servant Grumio endure a cold walk home. 4. Cold temperatures were said to tame choleric temperaments. See also. Classical element. Comedy of Humors. 3 Dashas of Ayurveda. 5 Temperaments. Mitama. Wuxing, 5 Principles of Chinese Philosophy. The history of science covers the development of science from ancient times to the present. It encompasses all 3 major branches of science: natural, social, and formal. 1. Science's earliest roots can be traced to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia around 3000 to 1200 BCE. 2. 3. These civilizations' contributions to mathematics, astronomy, and medicine influenced later Greek natural philosophy of classical antiquity, wherein formal attempts were made to provide explanations of events in the physical world based on natural causes. 2. 3. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, knowledge of Greek conceptions of the world deteriorated in Latin-speaking Western Europe. During the early centuries, 400 to 1000 CE, of the Middle Ages, 4, but continued to thrive in the Greek-speaking Eastern Roman, or Byzantine, Empire. Aided by translations of Greek texts, the Hellenistic worldview was preserved and absorbed into the Arabic-speaking Muslim world during the Islamic Golden Age. 5. The recovery and assimilation of Greek works and Islamic inquiries into Western Europe from the 10th to 13th century revived the learning of natural philosophy in the West. 4. 6. Natural philosophy was transformed during the scientific revolution in 16th to 17th century Europe. 7. 8. 9. As new ideas and discoveries departed from previous Greek conceptions and traditions. 10. 11. 12. 13. The new science that emerged was more mechanistic in its worldview, more integrated with mathematics, and more reliable and open as its knowledge was based on a newly defined scientific method. 11. 14. 15. More revolutions in subsequent centuries soon followed. The chemical revolution of the 18th century, for instance, introduced new quantitative methods and measurements for chemistry. 16. In the 19th century, new perspectives regarding the conservation of energy, age of Earth, and evolution came into focus. 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and in the 20th century, new discoveries in genetics and physics laid the foundations for new sub-disciplines such as molecular biology and particle physics. 23, 24, moreover, industrial and military concerns as well as the increasing complexity of new research endeavors ushered in the era of big science, particularly after the Second World War. 23, 24, 25. Approaches to History of Science. Main article, Historiography of Science. The nature of the history of science, and by implication, the definition of science itself, is a topic of debate. The history of science is often seen as a linear story of progress, but historians have shown that the story is more complex. 26, 27, 28. Science is a human activity, and scientific contributions have been made by people from a wide range of different backgrounds and cultures. Science is increasingly seen as part of a global history of exchange, conflict, and collaboration. 29. The relationship between science and religion has been characterized in terms of conflict, harmony, complexity, and mutual independence, among others. Events in Europe such as the Galileo affair of the early 17th century, associated with the scientific revolution and the Age of Enlightenment, led scholars such as John William Draper to postulate, circa 1874, a conflict thesis, suggesting that religion and science have been in conflict methodologically, factually and politically throughout history. The conflict thesis has since lost favor among the majority of contemporary scientists and historians of science. 30, 31, 32. However, some contemporary philosophers and scientists, such as Richard Dawkins, Lawrence Krauss, Peter Atkins, and Donald Prothero, still subscribe to this thesis. Historians have emphasized, citation needed, that trust is necessary for claims about nature to be agreed upon. In this light, the establishment of the Royal Society and its Code of Experiment, trustworthy because witnessed by its members, has become an important chapter in the historiography of science. 33. Many people in modern history, typically women and persons of color, were excluded from elite scientific communities and characterized by science as inferior. Historians in the 1980s and 1990s described the structural barriers to participation and began to recover the contributions of overlooked individuals. 34. 35. Historians have also investigated the mundane practices of science such as fieldwork and specimen collection. 36. Correspondence. 37. Drawing. 38. Record keeping. 39. And the use of laboratory and field equipment. 40. Prehistoric times. Further information, History of science in early cultures, proto-science, and alchemy. In prehistoric times, knowledge and technique were passed from generation to generation in an oral tradition. For instance, the domestication of maize for agriculture has been dated to about 9,000 years ago in southern Mexico, before the development of writing systems, 41, 42, 43. Similarly, archaeological evidence indicates the development of astronomical knowledge in preliterate societies, 44, 45. The oral tradition of preliterate societies had several features, the first of which was its fluidity. 2. New information was constantly absorbed and adjusted to new circumstances or community needs. There were no archives or reports. This fluidity was closely related to the practical need to explain and justify a present state of affairs. 2. Another feature was the tendency to describe the universe as just sky and earth, with a potential underworld. They were also prone to identify causes with beginnings, thereby providing a historical origin with an explanation. There was also a reliance on a medicine man or wise woman for healing, knowledge of divine or demonic causes of diseases, and in more extreme cases, for rituals such as exorcism, divination, songs, and incantations. 2. Finally, there was an inclination to unquestioningly accept explanations that might be deemed implausible in more modern times while at the same time not being aware that such credulous behaviors could have posed problems. 2. The development of writing enabled humans to store and communicate knowledge across generations with much greater accuracy. Its invention was a prerequisite for the development of philosophy and later science in ancient times. 2. Moreover, the extent to which philosophy and science would flourish in ancient times depended on the efficiency of a writing system, example, use of alphabets. 2. Earliest roots. The earliest roots of science can be traced to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia in around 300 to 1200 BCE. 2. Ancient Egypt. Further information: Egyptian astronomy, ancient Egyptian mathematics, and ancient Egyptian medicine. Number system and geometry. Starting in around 300 BCE, the ancient Egyptians developed a numbering system that was decimal in character and had oriented their knowledge of geometry to solving practical problems such as those of surveyors and builders. 2. Their development of geometry was itself a necessary development of surveying to preserve the layout and ownership of farmland, which was flooded annually by the Nile River. The 3-4-5 right triangle and other rules of geometry were used to build rectilinear structures, and the post and lintel architecture of Egypt. Disease and healing. The Ebers Papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, from ancient Egypt. Egypt was also a center of alchemy research for much of the Mediterranean. Based on the medical papyri written in the 2500 to 1200 BCE, the ancient Egyptians believed that disease was mainly caused by the invasion of bodies by evil forces or spirits. 2. Thus, in addition to using medicines, their healing therapies included prayer, incantation, and ritual. 2. The Ebers Papyrus, written in around 1600 BCE, contains medical recipes for treating diseases related to the eyes, mouth, skin, internal organs, and extremities, as well as abscesses, wounds, burns, ulcers, swollen glands, tumors, headaches, and even bad breath. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, written at about the same time, contains a surgical manual for treating wounds, fractures, and dislocations. The Egyptians believed that the effectiveness of their medicines depended on the preparation and administration under appropriate rituals. 2. Medical historians believe that ancient Egyptian pharmacology, for example, was largely ineffective. 46. Both the Ebers and Edwin Smith papyri applied the following components to the treatment of disease: examination, diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis. 47, which display strong parallels to the basic empirical method of science and, according to G.E.R. Lloyd, 48, played a significant role in the development of this methodology. Calendar. The ancient Egyptians even developed an official calendar that contained 12 months, 30 days each, and 5 days at the end of the year. 2. Unlike the Babylonian calendar or the ones used in Greek city-states at the time, the official Egyptian calendar was much simpler as it was fixed and did not take lunar and solar cycles into consideration. 2. Mesopotamia. Further information: Babylonian astronomy, Babylonian mathematics, and Babylonian medicine. Clay models of animal livers dating between the 19th and 18th centuries BCE, found in the royal palace at Mari in what is now Syria. The ancient Mesopotamians had extensive knowledge about the chemical properties of clay, sand, metal ore, bitumen, stone, and other natural materials, and applied this knowledge to practical use in manufacturing pottery, faience, glass, soap, metals, lime plaster, and waterproofing. Metallurgy required knowledge about the properties of metals. Nonetheless, the Mesopotamians seem to have had little interest in gathering information about the natural world for the mere sake of gathering information and were far more interested in studying the manner in which the gods had ordered the universe. Biology of non-human organisms was generally only written about in the context of mainstream academic disciplines. Animal physiology was studied extensively for the purpose of divination. The anatomy of the liver, which was seen as an important organ in haruspicy, was studied in particularly intensive detail. Animal behavior was also studied for divinatory purposes. Most information about the training and domestication of animals was probably transmitted orally without being written down, but one text dealing with the training of horses has survived. 49. Mesopotamian medicine. The ancient Mesopotamians had no distinction between rational science and magic. 50, 51, 52. When a person became ill, doctors prescribed magical formulas to be recited as well as medicinal treatments. 50, 51, 52, 49. The earliest medical prescriptions appear in Sumerian during the 3rd dynasty of Ur, circa 2112 BCE, c. 2004 BCE. 53. The most extensive Babylonian medical text, however, is the diagnostic handbook written by the Umanu, or chief scholar, Esagil-Kinapli of Borsippa. 54. During the reign of the Babylonian king Adad-apla-iddina, 1069–1046 BCE. 55. In East Semitic cultures, the main medicinal authority was a kind of exorcist healer known as an asapa. 50, 51, 52. The profession was generally passed down from father to son and was held in extremely high regard. 50. Of less frequent recourse was another kind of healer known as an asu, who corresponds more closely to a modern physician and treated physical symptoms using primarily folk remedies composed of various herbs, animal products, and minerals, as well as potions, enemas, and ointments or poultices. These physicians, who could be either male or female, also dressed wounds, set limbs, and performed simple surgeries. The ancient Mesopotamians also practiced prophylaxis and took measures to prevent the spread of disease. 49. In Babylonian astronomy, records of the motions of the stars, planets, and the moon are left on thousands of clay tablets created by scribes. Even today, astronomical periods identified by Mesopotamian proto-scientists are still widely used in Western calendars such as the solar year and the lunar month. Using this data, they developed mathematical methods to compute the changing length of daylight in the course of the year, predict the appearances and disappearances of the moon and planets, and eclipses of the sun and moon. Only a few astronomers' names are known, such as that of Kidinu, a Chaldean astronomer and mathematician. Kidinu's value for the solar year is in use for today's calendars. Babylonian astronomy was the first and highly successful attempt at giving a refined mathematical description of astronomical phenomena. According to the historian A. Abo, all subsequent varieties of scientific astronomy, in the Hellenistic world, in India, in Islam, and in the West, if not indeed all subsequent endeavor in the exact sciences, depend upon Babylonian astronomy in decisive and fundamental ways. 56. To the Babylonians and other Near Eastern cultures, messages from the gods or omens were concealed in all natural phenomena that could be deciphered and interpreted by those who are adept. 2. Hence, it was believed that the gods could speak through all terrestrial objects, example, animal entrails, dreams, malformed births, or even the color of a dog urinating on a person, and celestial phenomena. 2. Moreover, Babylonian astrology was inseparable from Babylonian astronomy. Mathematics. The Mesopotamian cuneiform tablet Plimpton 322, dating to the 18th century BCE, records a number of Pythagorean triplets, 3, 4, 5, 5, 12, 13, 57, hinting that the ancient Mesopotamians might have been aware of the Pythagorean theorem over a millennium before Pythagoras. 58, 59, 60. Ancient Asia. Mathematical achievements from Mesopotamia had some influence on the development of mathematics in India, and there were confirmed transmissions of mathematical ideas between India and China, which were bidirectional. 61. Nevertheless, the mathematical and scientific achievements in India and particularly in China occurred largely independently. 62. From those of Europe and the confirmed early influences that these two civilizations had on the development of science in Europe in the pre-modern era were indirect, with Mesopotamia and later the Islamic world acting as intermediaries. 61. The arrival of modern science, which grew out of the scientific revolution, in India and China and the Greater Asian region in general, can be traced to the scientific activities of Jesuit missionaries who were interested in studying the region's flora and fauna during the 16th to 17th century. 63. Indian astronomy and mathematics. Main articles: Indian mathematics and Indian astronomy. Further information: History of mathematics Indian, and History of astronomy India. The earliest traces of mathematical knowledge in the Indian subcontinent appear with the Indus Valley Civilization, c. 4th millennium BCE c. 3rd millennium BCE. The people of this civilization made bricks whose dimensions were in the proportion 4:2:1, which is favorable for the stability of a brick structure. 64. They also tried to standardize measurement of length to a high degree of accuracy. They designed a ruler, the Mohenjo-daro ruler, whose unit of length, approximately 1.32 inches or 3.4 centimeters, was divided into 10 equal parts. Bricks manufactured in ancient Mohenjo-daro often had dimensions that were integral multiples of this unit of length. 65. Indian astronomer and mathematician Aryabhata, 476 to 550, in his Aryabhatiya, 499, introduced the sine function in trigonometry. In 628 CE, Brahmagupta suggested that gravity was a force of attraction. 66. 67. He also lucidly explained the use of 0 as both a placeholder and a decimal digit, along with the Hindu-Arabic numeral system now used universally throughout the world. Arabic translations of the two astronomers' texts were soon available in the Islamic world, introducing what would become Arabic numerals to the Islamic world by the 9th century. 68. 69. During the 14th to 16th centuries, the Kerala school of astronomy and mathematics made significant advances in astronomy and especially mathematics, including fields such as trigonometry and analysis. In particular, Madhava of Sangamagrama is considered the founder of mathematical analysis. 70. In the Tantrasangraha treatise, Nilkanthasomyaji's updated the Aryabhatan model for the interior planets, Mercury, and Venus, and the equation that he specified for the center of these planets was more accurate than the ones in European or Islamic astronomy until the time of Johannes Kepler in the 17th century. 71. The first textual mention of astronomical concepts comes from the Vedas, religious literature of India. 72. According to Sarma, 2008, one finds in the Rigveda intelligent speculations about the genesis of the universe from non-existence, the configuration of the universe, the spherical self-supporting Earth, and the year of 360 days divided into 12 equal parts of 30 days each with a periodical intercalary month. 72. The first 12 chapters of the Siddhanta Shromani, written by Bhaskara in the 12th century, cover topics such as mean longitudes of the planets, true longitudes of the planets, the three problems of diurnal rotation, syzygies, lunar eclipses, solar eclipses, latitudes of the planets, risings and settings, the moon's crescent, conjunctions of the planets with each other, conjunctions of the planets with the fixed stars, and the padas of the sun and moon. The 13 chapters of the second part cover the nature of the sphere, as well as significant astronomical and trigonometric calculations based on it. Grammar. Some of the earliest linguistic activities can be found in Iron Age India, 1st millennium BCE, with the analysis of Sanskrit for the purpose of the correct recitation and interpretation of Vedic texts. The most notable grammarian of Sanskrit was Pini, c. 520 to 460 BCE, whose grammar formulates close to 4,000 rules for Sanskrit. Inherent in his analytic approach are the concepts of the phoneme, the morpheme and the root. The Tolkappiyam text, composed in the early centuries of the Common Era, 73, is a comprehensive text on Tamil grammar, which includes sutras on orthography, phonology, etymology, morphology, semantics, prosody, sentence structure, and the significance of context in language. Medicine. Findings from Neolithic graveyards in what is now Pakistan show evidence of proto-dentistry among an early farming culture. 74. The ancient text Susruta Samhita of Susruta describes procedures on various forms of surgery, including rhinoplasty, the repair of torn ear lobes, perineal lithotomy, cataract surgery, and several other excisions and other surgical procedures. Politics and State. An ancient Indian treatise on statecraft, economic policy and military strategy by Kautilya, 75, and Vihupta, 76, who are traditionally identified with Chakya, c. 350 to 283 BCE. In this treatise, the behaviors and relationships of the people, the king, the state, the government superintendents, courtiers, enemies, invaders, and corporations are analyzed and documented. Roger Bosch describes the Arthasastra as a book of political realism, a book analyzing how the political world does work and not very often stating how it ought to work, a book that frequently discloses to a king what calculating and sometimes brutal measures he must carry out to preserve the state and the common good. 77. China. Further information, History of Science and Technology in China, List of Chinese discoveries, and List of Chinese inventions. Louis Huey's Survey of Sea Island. Chinese mathematics. Further information, Chinese mathematics and history of mathematics. Chinese. From the earliest, the Chinese used a positional decimal system on counting boards in order to calculate. To express 10, a single rod is placed in the second box from the right. The spoken language uses a similar system to English, e.g. 4207. No symbol was used for 0. By the 1st century BCE, negative numbers and decimal fractions were in use, and the 9 chapters on the mathematical art included methods for extracting higher-order roots by Horner's method and solving linear equations and by Pythagoras' theorem. Cubic equations were solved in the Tang dynasty, and solutions of equations of order higher than 3 appeared in print in 1245 CE by Qin Chiushao. Pascal's triangle for binomial coefficients was described around 1100 by Jia Xian. Although the first attempts at an axiomatization of geometry appear in the Mahist canon in 330 BCE, Lu Hui developed algebraic methods in geometry in the 3rd century CE and also calculated pi to 5 significant figures. In 480, Zhu Chongzhi improved this by discovering the ratio 355, 113, \frac 355, 113, which remained the most accurate value for 1,200 years. Astronomical observations. Astronomical observations from China constitute the longest continuous sequence from any civilization and include records of sunspots, 112 records from 364 BCE, supernovas, 1054, lunar and solar eclipses. By the 12th century, they could reasonably accurately make predictions of eclipses, but the knowledge of this was lost during the Ming dynasty, so that the Jesuit Matteo Ricci gained much favor in 1601 by his predictions. 79, incomplete short citation. By 635 Chinese astronomers had observed that the tails of comets always point away from the sun. From antiquity, the Chinese used an equatorial system for describing the skies, and a star map from 940 was drawn using a cylindrical, Mercator, projection. The use of an armillary sphere is recorded from the 4th century BCE, and a sphere permanently mounted in equatorial axis from 52 BCE. In 125 CE, Zhang Heng used water power to rotate the sphere in real time. This included rings for the meridian and ecliptic. By 1270 they had incorporated the principles of the Arab torquetum. In the Song Empire, 960 to 1279, of Imperial China, Chinese scholar officials unearthed, studied, and catalogued ancient artifacts. Inventions. A modern replica of Han Dynasty polymath scientist Zhang Heng's seismometer of 132 CE. To better prepare for calamities, Zhang Heng invented a seismometer in 132 CE which provided instant alert to authorities in the capital Luoyang that an earthquake had occurred in a location indicated by a specific cardinal or ordinal direction. 81, although no tremors could be felt in the capital when Zhang told the court that an earthquake had just occurred in the northwest. A message came soon afterwards that an earthquake had indeed struck 400 to 500 kilometers, 250 to 310 miles, northwest of Luoyang, in what is now modern Gansu. 82, Zhang called his device the instrument for measuring the seasonal winds and the movements of the earth, Hofeng Didong Yi, so named because he and others thought that earthquakes were most likely caused by the enormous compression of trapped air. 83. There are many notable contributors to early Chinese disciplines, inventions, and practices throughout the ages. One of the best examples would be the medieval Song Chinese Shenhua, 1031 to 1095, a polymath and statesman who was the first to describe the magnetic needle compass used for navigation, discovered the concept of true north, improved the design of the astronomical gnomon, armillary sphere, sight tube, and clepsydra, and described the use of drydocks to repair boats. After observing the natural process of the inundation of silt and the find of marine fossils in the Taihang Mountains, hundreds of miles from the Pacific Ocean, Shen Kuo devised a theory of land formation, or geomorphology. He also adopted a theory of gradual climate change in regions over time, after observing petrified bamboo found underground at Yan'an, Shaanxi Province. If not for Shen Kuo's writing, 84, the architectural works of Yu Hao would be little known, along with the inventor of movable type printing, by Sheng, 990 to 1051. Shen's contemporary Su Song, 1020 to 1101, was also a brilliant polymath, an astronomer who created a celestial atlas of star maps, wrote a treatise related to botany, zoology, mineralogy, and metallurgy, and had erected a large astronomical clock tower in Kaifeng City in 1088. To operate the crowning armillary sphere, his clock tower featured an escapement mechanism and the world's oldest known use of an endless power-transmitting chain drive, 85. The Jesuit China missions of the 16th and 17th centuries learned to appreciate the scientific achievements of this ancient culture and made them known in Europe. Through their correspondence, European scientists first learned about the Chinese science and culture. 86. Western academic thought on the history of Chinese technology and science was galvanized by the work of Joseph Needham and the Needham Research Institute. Among the technological accomplishments of China were, according to the British scholar Needham, early seismological detectors, Zhongheng in the 2nd century, the water-powered celestial globe, Zhongheng, matches, the independent invention of the decimal system, dry docks, sliding calipers, the double-action piston pump, cast iron, the blast furnace, the iron plow, the multi-tube seed drill, the wheelbarrow, the suspension bridge, the winnowing machine, the rotary fan, the parachute, natural gas as fuel, the raised relief map, the propeller, the crossbow, and a solid fuel rocket, the multistage rocket, the horse collar, along with contributions in logic, astronomy, medicine, and other fields. However, cultural factors prevented these Chinese achievements from developing into modern science. According to Needham, it may have been the religious and philosophical framework of Chinese intellectuals which made them unable to accept the ideas of laws of nature. It was not that there was no order in nature for the Chinese, but rather that it was not an order ordained by a rational personal being, and hence there was no conviction that rational personal beings would be able to spell out in their lesser earthly languages the divine code of laws which he had decreed aforetime. The Taoists, indeed, would have scorned such an idea as being too naive for the subtlety and complexity of the universe as they intuited it. 87. Classical Antiquity. Further information, History of Science in Classical Antiquity. The contributions of the ancient Egyptians and Mesopotamians in the areas of astronomy, mathematics, and medicine had entered and shaped Greek natural philosophy of classical antiquity, whereby formal attempts were made to provide explanations of events in the physical world based on natural causes. 2. 3. Inquiries were also aimed at such practical goals such as establishing a reliable calendar or determining how to cure a variety of illnesses. The ancient people who were considered the first scientists may have thought of themselves as natural philosophers, as practitioners of a skilled profession, for example, physicians, or as followers of a religious tradition, for example, temple healers. Pre-Socratics. The earliest Greek philosophers, known as the Pre-Socratics, 88, provided competing answers to the question found in the myths of their neighbors: how did the ordered cosmos in which we live come to be? 89. The Pre-Socratic philosopher Thales, 640 to 546 BCE, of Miletus, identified by later authors such as Aristotle as the first of the Ionian philosophers. 2. Postulated non-supernatural explanations for natural phenomena. For example, that land floats on water and that earthquakes are caused by the agitation of the water upon which the land floats, rather than the god Poseidon. 90. Thales' student Pythagoras of Samos founded the Pythagorean school, which investigated mathematics for its own sake, and was the first to postulate that the earth is spherical in shape. 91. Leucippus, 5th century BCE, introduced atomism, the theory that all matter is made of indivisible, imperishable units called atoms. This was greatly expanded on by his pupil Democritus and later Epicurus. Natural philosophy. Plato's Academy. 1st century mosaic from Pompeii. Plato and Aristotle produced the first systematic discussions of natural philosophy, which did much to shape later investigations of nature. Their development of deductive reasoning was of particular importance and usefulness to later scientific inquiry. Plato founded the Platonic Academy in 387 BCE, whose motto was "Let none unversed in geometry enter here," and also turned out many notable philosophers. Plato's student Aristotle introduced empiricism and the notion that universal truths can be arrived at via observation and induction, thereby laying the foundations of the scientific method. 92. Aristotle also produced many biological writings that were empirical in nature, focusing on biological causation and the diversity of life. He made countless observations of nature, especially the habits and attributes of plants and animals on Lesbos, classified more than 540 animal species, and dissected at least 50. 93. Aristotle's writings profoundly influenced subsequent Islamic and European scholarship, though they were eventually superseded in the scientific revolution. 94. 95. Aristotle also contributed to theories of the elements and the cosmos. He believed that the celestial bodies, such as the planets and the sun, had something called an unmoved mover that put the celestial bodies in motion. Aristotle tried to explain everything through mathematics and physics, but sometimes explained things such as the motion of celestial bodies through a higher power such as God. Aristotle did not have the technological advancements that would have explained the motion of celestial bodies. 96. In addition, Aristotle had many views on the elements. He believed that everything was derived of the elements earth, water, air, fire, and lastly the ether. The ether was a celestial element, and therefore made up the matter of the celestial bodies. 97. The elements of earth, water, air, and fire were derived of a combination of two of the characteristics of hot, wet, cold, and dry, and all had their inevitable place and motion. The motion of these elements begins with earth being the closest to the earth, then water, air, fire, and finally ether. In addition to the makeup of all things, Aristotle came up with theories as to why things did not return to their natural motion. He understood that water sits above earth, air above water, and fire above air in their natural state. He explained that although all elements must return to their natural state, the human body and other living things have a constraint on the elements, thus not allowing the elements making one who they are to return to their natural state. 98. The important legacy of this period included substantial advances in factual knowledge, especially in anatomy, zoology, botany, mineralogy, geography, mathematics, and astronomy, an awareness of the importance of certain scientific problems, especially those related to the problem of change and its causes, and a recognition of the methodological importance of applying mathematics to natural phenomena and of undertaking empirical research. 99. In the Hellenistic age, scholars frequently employed the principles developed in earlier Greek thought, the application of mathematics and deliberate empirical research, in their scientific investigations. 100. Thus, clear unbroken lines of influence lead from ancient Greek and Hellenistic philosophers, to medieval Muslim philosophers and scientists, to the European Renaissance and Enlightenment, to the secular sciences of the modern day. Neither reason nor inquiry began with the ancient Greeks, but the Socratic method did, along with the idea of forms, give great advances in geometry, logic, and the natural sciences. According to Benjamin Farrington, former professor of classics at Swansea University, men were weighing for thousands of years before Archimedes worked out the laws of equilibrium. They must have had practical and intuitional knowledge of the principles involved. What Archimedes did was to sort out the theoretical implications of this practical knowledge and present the resulting body of knowledge as a logically coherent system. And again, with astonishment we find ourselves on the threshold of modern science. Nor should it be supposed that by some trick of translation the extracts have been given an air of modernity. Far from it. The vocabulary of these writings and their style are the source from which our own vocabulary and style have been derived. 101. Greek astronomy. Schematic of the Antikythera mechanism, 150 to 100 BCE. The astronomer Aristarchus of Samos was the first known person to propose a heliocentric model of the solar system, while the geographer Eratosthenes accurately calculated the circumference of the Earth. Hipparchus, c. 190, c. 120 BCE, produced the first systematic star catalogue. The level of achievement in Hellenistic astronomy and engineering is impressively shown by the Antikythera mechanism, 150 to 100 BCE, an analog computer for calculating the position of planets. Technological artifacts of similar complexity did not reappear until the 14th century, when mechanical astronomical clocks appeared in Europe. 102. Hellenistic medicine. There was not a defined societal structure for healthcare during the age of Hippocrates. 103. At that time, society was not organized and knowledgeable as people still relied on pure religious reasoning to explain illnesses. 103. Hippocrates introduced the first healthcare system based on science and clinical protocols. 104. Hippocrates' theories about physics and medicine helped pave the way in creating an organized medical structure for society. 104. In medicine, Hippocrates, c. 460 BC, c. 370 BCE, and his followers were the first to describe many diseases and medical conditions and developed the Hippocratic Oath for physicians, still relevant and in use today. Hippocrates' ideas are expressed in the Hippocratic Corpus. The collection notes descriptions of medical philosophies and how disease and lifestyle choices reflect on the physical body. 104. Hippocrates influenced a westernized, professional relationship among physician and patient. 105. Hippocrates is also known as the father of medicine. 104. Herophilus, 335–280 BCE, was the first to base his conclusions on dissection of the human body and to describe the nervous system. Galen, 129, c. 200 CE, performed many audacious operations, including brain and eye surgeries, that were not tried again for almost 2 millennia. Greek mathematics. One of the oldest surviving fragments of Euclid's Elements, found at Oxyrhynchus and dated to c. 100 CE, 106. Archimedes used the method of exhaustion to approximate the value of pi. In Hellenistic Egypt, the mathematician Euclid laid down the foundations of mathematical rigor and introduced the concepts of definition, axiom, theorem and proof still in use today in his Elements, considered the most influential textbook ever written. 107. Archimedes, considered one of the greatest mathematicians of all time. 108. Is credited with using the method of exhaustion to calculate the area under the arc of a parabola with the summation of an infinite series, and gave a remarkably accurate approximation of pi. 109. He is also known in physics for laying the foundations of hydrostatics, statics, and the explanation of the principle of the lever. Other developments. Theophrastus wrote some of the earliest descriptions of plants and animals, establishing the first taxonomy and looking at minerals in terms of their properties such as hardness. Pliny the Elder produced what is one of the largest encyclopedias of the natural world in 77 CE and must be regarded as the rightful successor to Theophrastus. For example, he accurately describes the octahedral shape of the diamond and proceeded to mention that diamond dust is used by engravers to cut and polish other gems owing to its great hardness. His recognition of the importance of crystal shape is a precursor to modern crystallography, while mention of numerous other minerals presages mineralogy. He also recognizes that other minerals have characteristic crystal shapes, but in one example, confuses the crystal habit with the work of lapidaries. He was also the first to recognize that amber was a fossilized resin from pine trees because he had seen samples with trapped insects within them. The development of the field of archaeology has its roots with history and with those who were interested in the past, such as kings and queens who wanted to show past glories of their respective nations. The 5th century BCE Greek historian Herodotus was the first scholar to systematically study the past and perhaps the first to examine artifacts. Greek scholarship under Roman rule. During the rule of Rome, famous historians such as Polybius, Livy and Plutarch documented the rise of the Roman Republic and the organization and histories of other nations, while statesmen like Julius Caesar, Cicero, and others provided examples of the politics of the Republic and Rome's empire and wars. The study of politics during this age was oriented toward understanding history, understanding methods of governing, and describing the operation of governments. The Roman conquest of Greece did not diminish learning and culture in the Greek provinces. 110. On the contrary, the appreciation of Greek achievements in literature, philosophy, politics, and the arts by Rome's upper class coincided with the increased prosperity of the Roman Empire. Greek settlements had existed in Italy for centuries and the ability to read and speak Greek was not uncommon in Italian cities such as Rome. 110. Moreover, the settlement of Greek scholars in Rome, whether voluntarily or as slaves, gave Romans access to teachers of Greek literature and philosophy. Conversely, young Roman scholars also studied abroad in Greece and upon their return to Rome, were able to convey Greek achievements to their Latin leadership. 110. And despite the translation of a few Greek texts into Latin, Roman scholars who aspired to the highest level did so using the Greek language. The Roman statesman and philosopher Cicero, 106–43 BCE, was a prime example. He had studied under Greek teachers in Rome and then in Athens and Rhodes. He mastered considerable portions of Greek philosophy, wrote Latin treatises on several topics, and even wrote Greek commentaries of Plato's Timaeus as well as a Latin translation of it, which has not survived. 110. In the beginning, support for scholarship in Greek knowledge was almost entirely funded by the Roman upper class. 110. There were all sorts of arrangements, ranging from a talented scholar being attached to a wealthy household to owning educated Greek-speaking slaves. 110. In exchange, scholars who succeeded at the highest level had an obligation to provide advice or intellectual companionship to their Roman benefactors, or to even take care of their libraries. The less fortunate or accomplished ones would teach their children or perform menial tasks. 110. The level of detail and sophistication of Greek knowledge was adjusted to suit the interests of their Roman patrons. That meant popularizing Greek knowledge by presenting information that were of practical value such as medicine or logic, for courts and politics, but excluding subtle details of Greek metaphysics and epistemology. Beyond the basics, the Romans did not value natural philosophy and considered it an amusement for leisure time. 110. Commentaries and encyclopedias were the means by which Greek knowledge was popularized for Roman audiences. 110. The Greek scholar Posidonius, c. 135–c. 51 BCE, a native of Syria, wrote prolifically on history, geography, moral philosophy, and natural philosophy. He greatly influenced Latin writers such as Marcus Terentius Varro, 116–27 BCE, who wrote the Encyclopedia 9 books of disciplines, which covered 9 arts: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, musical theory, medicine, and architecture. 110. The disciplines became a model for subsequent Roman encyclopedias, and Varro's 9 liberal arts were considered suitable education for a Roman gentleman. The first 7 of Varro's 9 arts would later define the 7 liberal arts of medieval schools. 110. The pinnacle of the popularization movement was the Roman scholar Pliny the Elder, 23–24–79 CE, a native of northern Italy, who wrote several books on the history of Rome and grammar. His most famous work was his voluminous Natural History. 110. After the death of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius in 180 CE, the favorable conditions for scholarship and learning in the Roman Empire were upended by political unrest, civil war, urban decay, and looming economic crisis. 110. In around 250 CE, barbarians began attacking and invading the Roman frontiers. These combined events led to a general decline in political and economic conditions. The living standards of the Roman upper class was severely impacted, and their loss of leisure diminished scholarly pursuits. 110. Moreover, during the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, the Roman Empire was administratively divided into 2 halves, Greek East and Latin West. These administrative divisions weakened the intellectual contact between the 2 regions. 110. Eventually, both halves went their separate ways, with the Greek East becoming the Byzantine Empire. 110. Christianity was also steadily expanding during this time and soon became a major patron of education in the Latin West. Initially, the Christian Church adopted some of the reasoning tools of Greek philosophy in the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE to defend its faith against sophisticated opponents. 110. Nevertheless, Greek philosophy received a mixed reception from leaders and adherents of the Christian faith. 110. Some such as Tertullian, c. 155 c. 230 CE, were vehemently opposed to philosophy, denouncing it as heretic. Others such as Augustine of Hippo, 354–430 CE, were ambivalent and defended Greek philosophy and science as the best ways to understand the natural world and therefore treated it as a handmaiden, or servant, of religion. 110. Education in the West began its gradual decline, along with the rest of Western Roman Empire, due to invasions by Germanic tribes, civil unrest, and economic collapse. Contact with the classical tradition was lost in specific regions such as Roman Britain and northern Gaul but continued to exist in Rome, northern Italy, southern Gaul, Spain, and North Africa. 110. Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, the classical learning continued in 3 major linguistic cultures and civilizations: Greek, the Byzantine Empire; Arabic, the Islamic world; and Latin, Western Europe. Byzantine Empire. Further information: Byzantine science and list of Byzantine inventions. The frontispiece of the Vienna Dioscurides, which shows a set of 7 famous physicians. Preservation of Greek heritage. The fall of the Western Roman Empire led to a deterioration of the classical tradition in the western part, or Latin West, of Europe in the 400s. In contrast, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire resisted the barbarian attacks and preserved and improved the learning, 111. While the Byzantine Empire still held learning centers such as Constantinople, Alexandria and Antioch, Western Europe's knowledge was concentrated in monasteries until the development of medieval universities in the 12th centuries. The curriculum of monastic schools included the study of the few available ancient texts and of new works on practical subjects like medicine, 112, and timekeeping, 113. In the 6th century in the Byzantine Empire, Isidore of Miletus compiled Archimedes' mathematical works in the Archimedes palimpsest, where all Archimedes' mathematical contributions were collected and studied. John Philoponus, another Byzantine scholar, was the first to question Aristotle's teaching of physics, introducing the theory of impetus, 114, 115. The theory of impetus was an auxiliary or secondary theory of Aristotelian dynamics, put forth initially to explain projectile motion against gravity. It is the intellectual precursor to the concepts of inertia, momentum and acceleration in classical mechanics. 116. The works of John Philoponus inspired Galileo Galilei 10 centuries later. 117, 118. Collapse. During the fall of Constantinople in 1453, a number of Greek scholars fled to North Italy, in which they fueled the era later commonly known as the Renaissance, as they brought with them a great deal of classical learning, including an understanding of botany, medicine, and zoology. Byzantium also gave the West important inputs: John Philoponus' criticism of Aristotelian physics, and the works of Dioscorides, 119. Islamic world. Further information: Science in the medieval Islamic world and timeline of science and engineering in the Muslim world. 15th century manuscript of Avicenna's The Canon of Medicine. This was the period, 8th to 14th century CE, of the Islamic Golden Age, where commerce thrived, and new ideas and technologies emerged, such as the importation of papermaking from China, which made the copying of manuscripts inexpensive. Translations and Hellenization. The eastward transmission of Greek heritage to Western Asia was a slow and gradual process that spanned over 1,000 years, beginning with the Asian conquests of Alexander the Great in 335 BCE to the founding of Islam in the 7th century CE. 5. The birth and expansion of Islam during the 7th century was quickly followed by its Hellenization. Knowledge of Greek conceptions of the world was preserved and absorbed into Islamic theology, law, culture, and commerce, which were aided by the translations of traditional Greek texts and some Syriac intermediary sources into Arabic during the 8th to 9th century. Education and scholarly pursuits. Suleimani Mosque. Madrasas were centers for many different religious and scientific studies and were the culmination of different institutions such as mosques based around religious studies, housing for out-of-town visitors, and finally educational institutions focused on the natural sciences. 120. Unlike Western universities, students at a madrasa would learn from one specific teacher, who would issue a certificate at the completion of their studies called an ijaza. An ijaza differs from a Western university degree in many ways, one being that it is issued by a single person rather than an institution, and another being that it is not an individual degree declaring adequate knowledge over broad subjects, but rather a license to teach and pass on a very specific set of texts. 121. Women were also allowed to attend madrasas, as both students and teachers, something not seen in high Western education until the 1800s. 121. Madrasas were more than just academic centers. The Suleimani Mosque, for example, was one of the earliest and most well-known madrasas, which was built by Suleiman the Magnificent in the 16th century. 122. The Suleimani Mosque was home to a hospital and medical college, a kitchen, and children's school, as well as serving as a temporary home for travelers. 122. Higher education at a madrasa, or college, was focused on Islamic law and religious science, and students had to engage in self-study for everything else. 5. And despite the occasional theological backlash, many Islamic scholars of science were able to conduct their work in relatively tolerant urban centers, example, Baghdad and Cairo, and were protected by powerful patrons. 5. They could also travel freely and exchange ideas as there were no political barriers within the unified Islamic State. 5. Islamic science during this time was primarily focused on the correction, extension, articulation, and application of Greek ideas to new problems. 5. Advancements in mathematics. Most of the achievements by Islamic scholars during this period were in mathematics. 5. Arabic mathematics was a direct descendant of Greek and Indian mathematics. 5. For instance, what is now known as Arabic numerals originally came from India, but Muslim mathematicians made several key refinements to the number system, such as the introduction of decimal point notation. Mathematicians such as Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, c. 780 to 850, gave his name to the concept of the algorithm, while the term algebra is derived from al-Jabr, the beginning of the title of one of his publications. 123. Islamic trigonometry continued from the works of Ptolemy's Almagest and Indian Siddhanta, from which they added trigonometric functions, drew up tables, and applied trigonometry to spheres and planes. Many of their engineers, instruments makers, and surveyors contributed books in applied mathematics. It was in astronomy where Islamic mathematicians made their greatest contributions. Al-Battani, c. 858 to 929, improved the measurements of Hipparchus. Preserved in the translation of Ptolemy's Hemorism, the great treatise, translated as Almagest. Al-Battani also improved the precision of the measurement of the precession of the Earth's axis. Corrections were made to Ptolemy's geocentric model by Al-Battani, Ibn al-Haytham, 124, Averroes and the Moraga astronomers such as Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, Muayyad al-Din al-Urdi and Ibn al-Shatter, 125, 126. Scholars with geometric skills made significant improvements to the earlier classical texts on light and sight by Euclid, Aristotle, and Ptolemy. 5. The earliest surviving Arabic treatises were written in the 9th century by Abu Ishaq al-Kindi, Kusta ibn Luqa, and, in fragmentary form, Ahmad ibn Isa. Later in the 11th century, Ibn al-Haytham, known as al-Hazan in the West, a mathematician and astronomer, synthesized a new theory of vision based on the works of his predecessors. 5. His new theory included a complete system of geometrical optics, which was set in great detail in his Book of Optics. 5. 127. His book was translated into Latin and was relied upon as a principal source on the science of optics in Europe until the 17th century. 5. Institutionalization of medicine. The medical sciences were prominently cultivated in the Islamic world. 5. The works of Greek medical theories, especially those of Galen, were translated into Arabic and there was an outpouring of medical texts by Islamic physicians, which were aimed at organizing, elaborating, and disseminating classical medical knowledge. 5. Medical specialties started to emerge, such as those involved in the treatment of eye diseases such as cataracts. Ibn Sina, known as Avicenna in the West, c. 980 to 1037, was a prolific Persian medical encyclopedist. 128, wrote extensively on medicine. 129, 130, with his two most notable works in medicine being the Kitab al-Shif, Book of Healing, and the Canon of Medicine, both of which were used as standard medicinal texts in both the Muslim world and in Europe well into the 17th century. Amongst his many contributions are the discovery of the contagious nature of infectious diseases, 129, and the introduction of clinical pharmacology, 131. Institutionalization of medicine was another important achievement in the Islamic world. Although hospitals as an institution for the sick emerged in the Byzantium Empire, the model of institutionalized medicine for all social classes was extensive in the Islamic Empire and was scattered throughout. In addition to treating patients, physicians could teach apprentice physicians, as well write and do research. The discovery of the pulmonary transit of blood in the human body by Ibn al-Nafis occurred in a hospital setting. 5. Decline. Islamic science began its decline in the 12th to 13th century, before the Renaissance in Europe, due in part to the Christian reconquest of Spain and the Mongol conquests in the East in the 11th to 13th century. The Mongols sacked Baghdad, capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, in 1258, which ended the Abbasid Empire. 5. 132. Nevertheless, many of the conquerors became patrons of the sciences. Hulagu Khan, for example, who led the siege of Baghdad, became a patron of the Moraga Observatory. 5. Islamic astronomy continued to flourish into the 16th century. 5. Western Europe. By the 11th century, most of Europe had become Christian, stronger monarchies emerged, borders were restored, technological developments and agricultural innovations were made, increasing the food supply and population. Classical Greek texts were translated from Arabic and Greek into Latin, stimulating scientific discussion in Western Europe. 133. In classical antiquity, Greek and Roman taboos had meant that dissection was usually banned, but in the Middle Ages medical teachers and students at Bologna began to open human bodies, and Mondino de Luzzi, circa 1275 to 1326, produced the first known anatomy textbook based on human dissection, 134, 135. As a result of the Pax Mongolica, Europeans, such as Marco Polo, began to venture further and further east. The written accounts of Polo and his fellow travelers inspired other Western European maritime explorers to search for a direct sea route to Asia, ultimately leading to the Age of Discovery, 136. Technological advances were also made, such as the early flight of Aylmer of Malmesbury, who had studied mathematics in 11th century England, 137, and the metallurgical achievements of the Cistercian blast furnace at Loskill, 138, 139. Medieval universities. An intellectual revitalization of Western Europe started with the birth of medieval universities in the 12th century. These urban institutions grew from the informal scholarly activities of learned friars who visited monasteries, consulted libraries, and conversed with other fellow scholars. 140. A friar who became well known would attract a following of disciples, giving rise to a brotherhood of scholars, or collegium in Latin. A collegium might travel to a town or request a monastery to host them. However, if the number of scholars within a collegium grew too large, they would opt to settle in a town instead. 140. As the number of collegia within a town grew, the collegium might request that their king grant them a charter that would convert them into a universitas. 140. Many universities were chartered during this period, with the first in Bologna in 1088, followed by Paris in 1150, Oxford in 1167, and Cambridge in 1231. 140. The granting of a charter meant that the medieval universities were partially sovereign and independent from local authorities. 140. Their independence allowed them to conduct themselves and judge their own members based on their own rules. Furthermore, as initially religious institutions, their faculties and students were protected from capital punishment, example, gallows. 140. Such independence was a matter of custom, which could, in principle, be revoked by their respective rulers if they felt threatened. Discussions of various subjects or claims at these medieval institutions, no matter how controversial, were done in a formalized way so as to declare such discussions as being within the bounds of a university and therefore protected by the privileges of that institution's sovereignty. 140. A claim could be described as ex cathedra, literally from the chair, used within the context of teaching, or ex hypothesi, by hypothesis. This meant that the discussions were presented as purely an intellectual exercise that did not require those involved to commit themselves to the truth of a claim or to proselytize. Modern academic concepts and practices such as academic freedom or freedom of inquiry are remnants of these medieval privileges that were tolerated in the past. 140. The curriculum of these medieval institutions centered on the 7 liberal arts, which were aimed at providing beginning students with the skills for reasoning and scholarly language. 140. Students would begin their studies starting with the first 3 liberal arts or trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, followed by the next 4 liberal arts or quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. 140. 110. Those who completed these requirements and received their baccalaureate, or Bachelor of Arts, had the option to join the higher faculty, law, medicine, or theology, which would confer an LLD for a lawyer, an MD for a physician, or THD for a theologian. 140. Students who chose to remain in the lower faculty, arts, could work towards a magister, or master's, degree and would study 3 philosophies, metaphysics, ethics, and natural philosophy. 140. Latin translations of Aristotle's works such as De Anima, On the Soul, and the commentaries on them were required. Readings. As time passed, the lower faculty was allowed to confer its own doctoral degree, called the PhD. 140. Many of the masters were drawn to encyclopedias and had used them as textbooks. But these scholars yearned for the complete original texts of the ancient Greek philosophers, mathematicians, and physicians such as Aristotle, Euclid, and Galen, which were not available to them at the time. These ancient Greek texts were to be found in the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. 140. Translations of Greek and Arabic sources. Contact with the Byzantine Empire, 117, and with the Islamic world during the Reconquista and the Crusades, allowed Latin Europe access to scientific Greek and Arabic texts, including the works of Aristotle, Ptolemy, Isidore of Miletus, John Philoponus, Jabir ibn Hayyan, Al-Khwarizmi, Al-Hazen, Avicenna, and Averroes. European scholars had access to the translation programs of Raymond of Toledo, who sponsored the 12th century Toledo School of Translators from Arabic to Latin. Later translators like Michael Scotus would learn Arabic in order to study these texts directly. The European universities aided materially in the translation and propagation of these texts and started a new infrastructure which was needed for scientific communities. In fact, European university put many works about the natural world and the study of nature at the center of its curriculum, 141, with the result that the medieval university laid far greater emphasis on science than does its modern counterpart and descendant. 142. At the beginning of the 13th century, there were reasonably accurate Latin translations of the main works of almost all the intellectually crucial ancient authors, allowing a sound transfer of scientific ideas via both the universities and the monasteries. By then, the natural philosophy in these texts began to be extended by scholastics such as Robert Grosseteste, Roger Bacon, Albertus Magnus and Duns Scotus. Precursors of the modern scientific method, influenced by earlier contributions of the Islamic world, can be seen already in Grosseteste's emphasis on mathematics as a way to understand nature, and in the empirical approach admired by Bacon, particularly in his Opus Majus. Pierre Duham's thesis is that Stephen Tempier, the Bishop of Paris' condemnation of 1277 led to the study of medieval science as a serious discipline, but no one in the field any longer endorses his view that modern science started in 1277. 143, however, many scholars agree with Duham's view that the mid-late Middle Ages saw important scientific developments, 144, 145, 146. Medieval science. The first half of the 14th century saw much important scientific work, largely within the framework of scholastic commentaries on Aristotle's scientific writings. 147, William of Ockham emphasized the principle of parsimony. Natural philosophers should not postulate unnecessary entities, so that motion is not a distinct thing but is only the moving object. 148, and an intermediary sensible species is not needed to transmit an image of an object to the eye. 149, scholars such as Jean Buridan and Nicole Oersma started to reinterpret elements of Aristotle's mechanics. In particular, Buridan developed the theory that impetus was the cause of the motion of projectiles, which was a first step towards the modern concept of inertia. 150, the Oxford calculators began to mathematically analyze the kinematics of motion, making this analysis without considering the causes of motion. 151. In 1348, the Black Death and other disasters sealed a sudden end to philosophic and scientific development. Yet, the rediscovery of ancient texts was stimulated by the fall of Constantinople in 1453, when many Byzantine scholars sought refuge in the West. Meanwhile, the introduction of printing was to have great effect on European society. The facilitated dissemination of the printed word democratized learning and allowed ideas such as algebra to propagate more rapidly. These developments paved the way for the scientific revolution, where scientific inquiry, halted at the start of the Black Death, resumed. 152, 153. Renaissance. Further information, Science in the Renaissance, Continuity Thesis, Decline of Western Alchemy, and Natural Magic. Revival of Learning. The renewal of learning in Europe began with 12th century scholasticism. The Northern Renaissance showed a decisive shift in focus from Aristotelian natural philosophy to chemistry and the biological sciences, botany, anatomy, and medicine. 154. Thus modern science in Europe was resumed in a period of great upheaval, the Protestant Reformation and Catholic Counter-Reformation, the discovery of the Americas by Christopher Columbus, the fall of Constantinople, but also the rediscovery of Aristotle during the scholastic period presaged large social and political changes. Thus, a suitable environment was created in which it became possible to question scientific doctrine, in much the same way that Martin Luther and John Calvin questioned religious doctrine. The works of Ptolemy, astronomy, and Galen, medicine, were found not always to match everyday observations. Work by Vesalius on human cadavers found problems with the Galenic view of anatomy. 155. Theophrastus' work on rocks, Perry Lithin, remained authoritative for millennia, its interpretation of fossils was not overturned until after the scientific revolution. During the Italian Renaissance, Niccolò Machiavelli established the emphasis of modern political science on direct empirical observation of political institutions and actors. Later, the expansion of the scientific paradigm during the Enlightenment further pushed the study of politics beyond normative determinations, citation needed, in particular, the study of statistics, to study the subjects of the state, has been applied to polling and voting. In archaeology, the 15th and 16th centuries saw the rise of antiquarians in Renaissance Europe who were interested in the collection of artifacts. Scientific revolution and birth of new science. Galileo Galilei, father of modern science. The early modern period is seen as a flowering of the European Renaissance. There was a willingness to question previously held truths and search for new answers resulted in a period of major scientific advancements, now known as the Scientific Revolution, which led to the emergence of a new science that was more mechanistic in its worldview, more integrated with mathematics, and more reliable and open as its knowledge was based on a newly defined scientific method. 11, 14, 15. 156. The scientific revolution is a convenient boundary between ancient thought and classical physics, and is traditionally held by most, citation needed, historians, citation needed, to have begun in 1543, when the books De Humani Corporis Fabrica, On the Workings of the Human Body, by Andreas Vesalius, and also De Revolutionibus, by the astronomer Nicholas Copernicus, were first printed. The period culminated with the publication of the Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica in 1687 by Isaac Newton, representative of the unprecedented growth of scientific publications throughout Europe. Other significant scientific advances were made during this time by Galileo Galilei, Edmund Halley, William Harvey, Pierre Fermat, Robert Hooke, Christian Huygens, Tycho Brahe, Johannes Kepler, Marin Mersenne, Gottfried Leibniz, Isaac Newton, and Blaise Pascal. 157. In philosophy, major contributions were made by Francis Bacon, Sir Thomas Browne, René Descartes, Baruch Spinoza, Pierre Gassendi, Robert Boyle, and Thomas Hobbes. 157. Christian Huygens derived the centripetal and centrifugal forces and was the first to transfer mathematical inquiry to describe unobservable physical phenomena. William Gilbert did some of the earliest experiments with electricity and magnetism, establishing that the Earth itself is magnetic. Heliocentrism. The heliocentric astronomical model of the universe was refined by Nicholas Copernicus. Copernicus proposed the idea that the Earth and all heavenly spheres, containing the planets and other objects in the cosmos, rotated around the Sun. 158. His heliocentric model also proposed that all stars were fixed and did not rotate on an axis, nor in any motion at all. 159. His theory proposed the yearly rotation of the Earth and the other heavenly spheres around the Sun and was able to calculate the distances of planets using deference and epicycles. Although these calculations were not completely accurate, Copernicus was able to understand the distance order of each heavenly sphere. The Copernican heliocentric system was a revival of the hypotheses of Aristarchus of Samos and Seleucus of Seleucia. 160. Aristarchus of Samos did propose that the Earth rotated around the Sun but did not mention anything about the other heavenly spheres' order, motion, or rotation. 161. Seleucus of Seleucia also proposed the rotation of the Earth around the Sun but did not mention anything about the other heavenly spheres. In addition, Seleucus of Seleucia understood that the Moon rotated around the Earth and could be used to explain the tides of the oceans, thus further proving his understanding of the heliocentric idea. 162. Newly defined scientific method. The scientific method was also better developed as the modern way of thinking emphasized experimentation and reason over traditional considerations. Galileo, father of modern physics, also made use of experiments to validate physical theories, a key element of the scientific method. During the Italian Renaissance, Niccolò Machiavelli established the emphasis of modern political science on direct empirical observation of political institutions and actors. Later, the expansion of the scientific paradigm during the Enlightenment further pushed the study of politics beyond normative determinations, citation needed, in particular, the study of statistics, to study the subjects of the state, has been applied to polling and voting. In archaeology, the 15th and 16th centuries saw the rise of antiquarians in Renaissance Europe who were interested in the collection of artifacts. Scientific revolution and birth of new science. Galileo Galilei, father of modern science. The early modern period is seen as a flowering of the European Renaissance. There was a willingness to question previously held truths and search for new answers resulted in a period of major scientific advancements, now known as the Scientific Revolution, which led to the emergence of a new science that was more mechanistic in its worldview, more integrated with mathematics, and more reliable and open as its knowledge was based on a newly defined scientific method. 11, 14, 15. 156. The Scientific Revolution is a convenient boundary between ancient thought and classical physics, and is traditionally held by most, citation needed, historians, citation needed, to have begun in 1543, when the books De Humani Corporis Fabrica, On the Workings of the Human Body, by Andreas Vesalius, and also De Revolutionibus, by the astronomer Nicholas Copernicus, were first printed. The period culminated with the publication of the Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica in 1687 by Isaac Newton, representative of the unprecedented growth of scientific publications throughout Europe. Other significant scientific advances were made during this time by Galileo Galilei, Edmund Halley, William Harvey, Pierre Fermat, Robert Hooke, Christian Huygens, Tycho Brahe, Johannes Kepler, Marin Mersenne, Gottfried Leibniz, Isaac Newton, and Blaise Pascal. 157. In philosophy, major contributions were made by Francis Bacon, Sir Thomas Browne, René Descartes, Baruch Spinoza, Pierre Gassendi, Robert Boyle, and Thomas Hobbes. 157. Christian Huygens derived the centripetal and centrifugal forces and was the first to transfer mathematical inquiry to describe unobservable physical phenomena. William Gilbert did some of the earliest experiments with electricity and magnetism, establishing that the Earth itself is magnetic. Heliocentrism. The heliocentric astronomical model of the universe was refined by Nicholas Copernicus. Copernicus proposed the idea that the Earth and all heavenly spheres, containing the planets and other objects in the cosmos, rotated around the Sun. 158. His heliocentric model also proposed that all stars were fixed and did not rotate on an axis, nor in any motion at all. 159. His theory proposed the yearly rotation of the Earth and the other heavenly spheres around the Sun and was able to calculate the distances of planets using deference and epicycles. Although these calculations were not completely accurate, Copernicus was able to understand the distance order of each heavenly sphere. The Copernican heliocentric system was a revival of the hypotheses of Aristarchus of Samos and Seleucus of Seleucia. 160. Aristarchus of Samos did propose that the Earth rotated around the Sun but did not mention anything about the other heavenly spheres' order, motion, or rotation. 161. Seleucus of Seleucia also proposed the rotation of the Earth around the Sun but did not mention anything about the other heavenly spheres. In addition, Seleucus of Seleucia understood that the Moon rotated around the Earth and could be used to explain the tides of the oceans, thus further proving his understanding of the heliocentric idea. 162. Newly defined scientific method. The scientific method was also better developed as the modern way of thinking emphasized experimentation and reason over traditional considerations. Galileo, father of modern physics, also made use of experiments to validate physical theories, a key element of the scientific method. Age of Enlightenment. Further information, Science in the Age of Enlightenment. Continuation of Scientific Revolution. The Scientific Revolution continued into the Age of Enlightenment, which accelerated the development of modern science. Planets and orbits. Main article, Copernican Revolution. The heliocentric model revived by Nicholas Copernicus was followed by the model of planetary motion given by Johannes Kepler in the early 17th century, which proposed that the planets follow elliptical orbits, with the Sun at one focus of the ellipse. Calculus and Newtonian Mechanics. Main article, History of Calculus. Main article, Newton's Laws of Motion. Isaac Newton initiated classical mechanics in physics. In 1687, Isaac Newton published the Principia Mathematica, detailing two comprehensive and successful physical theories, Newton's laws of motion, which led to classical mechanics, and Newton's law of universal gravitation, which describes the fundamental force of gravity. Emergence of chemistry. Main article, Chemical Revolution. A decisive moment came when chemistry was distinguished from alchemy by Robert Boyle in his work The Skeptical Chymist, in 1661, although the alchemical tradition continued for some time after his work. Other important steps included the gravimetric experimental practices of medical chemists like William Cullen, Joseph Black, Torbern Bergman and Pierre Macquer, and through the work of Antoine Lavoisier, father of modern chemistry, on oxygen and the law of conservation of mass, which refuted phlogiston theory. Modern chemistry emerged from the 16th through the 18th centuries through the material practices and theories promoted by alchemy, medicine, manufacturing, and mining. 163, 164, 165. Circulatory system. William Harvey published De Motu Cordis in 1628, which revealed his conclusions based on his extensive studies of vertebrate circulatory systems. 157. He identified the central role of the heart, arteries, and veins in producing blood movement in a circuit, and failed to find any confirmation of Galen's pre-existing notions of heating and cooling functions. 166. The history of early modern biology and medicine is often told through the search for the seat of the soul. 167. Galen in his descriptions of his foundational work in medicine presents the distinctions between arteries, veins, and nerves using the vocabulary of the soul. 168. Scientific societies and journals. A critical innovation was the creation of permanent scientific societies and their scholarly journals, which dramatically sped the diffusion of new ideas. Typical was the founding of the Royal Society in London in 1660 and its journal in 1665, the Philosophical Transaction of the Royal Society, the first scientific journal in English. 169, 1665 also saw the first journal in French, the Journal des Sçavans. Science drawing on the works, 170, of Newton, Descartes, Pascal and Leibniz. Science was on a path to modern mathematics, physics and technology by the time of the generation of Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790, Leonard Euler, 1707 to 1783, Mikhail Lomonosov, 1711 to 1765, and Jean-Laurent d'Alembert, 1717 to 1783. Denis Diderot's Encyclopédie, published between 1751 and 1772, brought this new understanding to a wider audience. The impact of this process was not limited to science and technology, but affected philosophy, Immanuel Kant, David Hume, religion, the increasingly significant impact of science upon religion, and society and politics in general, Adam Smith, Voltaire. Developments in geology. Geology did not undergo systematic restructuring during the scientific revolution but instead existed as a cloud of isolated, disconnected ideas about rocks, minerals, and landforms long before it became a coherent science. Robert Hooke formulated a theory of earthquakes, and Nicholas Steno developed the theory of superposition and argued that fossils were the remains of once living creatures. Beginning with Thomas Burnet's sacred theory of the Earth in 1681, natural philosophers began to explore the idea that the Earth had changed over time. Burnet and his contemporaries interpreted Earth's past in terms of events described in the Bible, but their work laid the intellectual foundations for secular interpretations of Earth history. Post-scientific revolution. Bioelectricity. During the late 18th century, researchers such as Hugh Williamson, 171, and John Walsh experimented on the effects of electricity on the human body. Further studies by Luigi Galvani and Alessandro Volta established the electrical nature of what Volta called galvanism. 172, 173. Developments in geology. 1812 skeletal and muscular reconstruction of Anoplotherium commune by Georges Cuvier based on fossil remains from the Paris Basin. Modern geology, like modern chemistry, gradually evolved during the 18th and early 19th centuries. Benoit de Maillet and the Comte de Buffon saw the Earth as much older than the 6,000 years envisioned by biblical scholars. Jean-Étienne Guettard and Nicolas Desmarest hiked central France and recorded their observations on some of the first geological maps. Aided by chemical experimentation, naturalists such as Scotland's John Walker, 174, Sweden's Torbern Bergman, and Germany's Abraham Werner created comprehensive classification systems for rocks and minerals, a collective achievement that transformed geology into a cutting-edge field by the end of the 18th century. These early geologists also proposed a generalized interpretations of Earth history that led James Hutton, Georges Cuvier, and Alexander Brongniart, following in the steps of Steno, to argue that layers of rock could be dated by the fossils they contained, a principle first applied to the geology of the Paris Basin. The use of index fossils became a powerful tool for making geological maps, because it allowed geologists to correlate the rocks in one locality with those of similar age in other, distant localities. The basis for classical economics forms Adam Smith's An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, published in 1776. Smith criticized mercantilism, advocating a system of free trade with division of labor. He postulated an invisible hand that regulated economic systems made up of actors guided only by self-interest. The invisible hand mentioned in a lost page in the middle of a chapter in the middle of The Wealth of Nations, 1776, advances as Smith's central message. Social science. Anthropology can best be understood as an outgrowth of the Age of Enlightenment. It was during this period that Europeans attempted systematically to study human behavior. Traditions of jurisprudence, history, philology and sociology developed during this time and informed the development of the social sciences of which anthropology was a part. 19th century. Further information, 19th century in science. The 19th century saw the birth of science as a profession. William Whewell had coined the term scientist in 1833, 175, which soon replaced the older term natural philosopher. Developments in physics. Alessandro Volta demonstrates the first electrical cell to Napoleon in 1801. In physics, the behavior of electricity and magnetism was studied by Giovanni Aldini, Alessandro Volta, Michael Faraday, George Ohm, and others. The experiments, theories and discoveries of Michael Faraday, André-Marie Ampère, James Clerk Maxwell, and their contemporaries led to the unification of the two phenomena into a single theory of electromagnetism as described by Maxwell's equations. Thermodynamics led to an understanding of heat and the notion of energy being defined. Discovery of Neptune. In astronomy, the planet Neptune was discovered. Advances in astronomy and in optical systems in the 19th century resulted in the first observation of an asteroid, 1 Ceres, in 1801, and the discovery of Neptune in 1846. Developments in mathematics. In mathematics, the notion of complex numbers finally matured and led to a subsequent analytical theory. They also began the use of hypercomplex numbers. Karl Weierstrass and others carried out the arithmetization of analysis for functions of real and complex variables. It also saw rise to new progress in geometry beyond those classical theories of Euclid, after a period of nearly 2,000 years. The mathematical science of logic likewise had revolutionary breakthroughs after a similarly long period of stagnation. But the most important step in science at this time were the ideas formulated by the creators of electrical science. Their work changed the face of physics and made possible for new technology to come about such as electric power, electrical telegraphy, the telephone, and radio. Developments in chemistry. Dmitry Mendeleev. In chemistry, Dmitry Mendeleev, following the atomic theory of John Dalton, created the first periodic table of elements. Other highlights include the discoveries unveiling the nature of atomic structure and matter, simultaneously with chemistry, and of new kinds of radiation. The theory that all matter is made of atoms, which are the smallest constituents of matter that cannot be broken down without losing the basic chemical and physical properties of that matter, was provided by John Dalton in 1803, although the question took 100 years to settle as proven. Dalton also formulated the law of mass relationships. In 1869, Dmitry Mendeleev composed his periodic table of elements on the basis of Dalton's discoveries. The synthesis of urea by Friedrich Wöhler opened a new research field, organic chemistry, and by the end of the 19th century, scientists were able to synthesize hundreds of organic compounds. The later part of the 19th century saw the exploitation of the Earth's petrochemicals, after the exhaustion of the oil supply from whaling. By the 20th century, systematic production of refined materials provided a ready supply of products which provided not only energy, but also synthetic materials for clothing, medicine, and everyday disposable resources. Application of the techniques of organic chemistry to living organisms resulted in physiological chemistry, the precursor to biochemistry. Age of the Earth. Over the first half of the 19th century, geologists such as Charles Lyell, Adam Sedgwick, and Roderick Murchison applied the new technique to rocks throughout Europe and eastern North America, setting the stage for more detailed, government-funded mapping projects in later decades. Midway through the 19th century, the focus of geology shifted from description and classification to attempts to understand how the surface of the Earth had changed. The first comprehensive theories of mountain building were proposed during this period, as were the first modern theories of earthquakes and volcanoes. Louis Agassiz and others established the reality of continent-covering ice ages, and fluvialists like Andrew Crombie Ramsay argued that river valleys were formed, over millions of years, by the rivers that flow through them. After the discovery of radioactivity, radiometric dating methods were developed, starting in the 20th century. Alfred Wegener's theory of continental drift was widely dismissed when he proposed it in the 1910s, but new data gathered in the 1950s and 1960s led to the theory of plate tectonics, which provided a plausible mechanism for it. Plate tectonics also provided a unified explanation for a wide range of seemingly unrelated geological phenomena. Since 1970 it has served as the unifying principle in geology, evolution and inheritance. In mid-July 1837 Charles Darwin started his B notebook on the transmutation of species, and on page 36 wrote "I think" above his first evolutionary tree. Perhaps the most prominent, controversial, and far-reaching theory in all of science has been the theory of evolution by natural selection, which was independently formulated by Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace. It was described in detail in Darwin's book The Origin of Species, which was published in 1859. In it, Darwin proposed that the features of all living things, including humans, were shaped by natural processes over long periods of time. The theory of evolution in its current form affects almost all areas of biology. 176 Implications of evolution on fields outside of pure science have led to both opposition and support from different parts of society, and profoundly influenced the popular understanding of man's place in the universe. Separately, Gregor Mendel formulated in the Principles of Inheritance in 1866, which became the basis of modern genetics. Germ theory. Another important landmark in medicine and biology were the successful efforts to prove the germ theory of disease. Following this, Louis Pasteur made the first vaccine against rabies, and also made many discoveries in the field of chemistry, including the asymmetry of crystals. In 1847, Hungarian physician Ignác Fülöp Semmelweis dramatically reduced the occurrence of puerperal fever by simply requiring physicians to wash their hands before attending to women in childbirth. This discovery predated the germ theory of disease. However, Semmelweis' findings were not appreciated by his contemporaries, and handwashing came into use only with discoveries by British surgeon Joseph Lister, who in 1865 proved the principles of antisepsis. Lister's work was based on the important findings by French biologist Louis Pasteur. Pasteur was able to link microorganisms with disease, revolutionizing medicine. He also devised one of the most important methods in preventive medicine, when in 1880 he produced a vaccine against rabies. Pasteur invented the process of pasteurization to help prevent the spread of disease through milk and other foods. 177. Schools of economics. Karl Marx developed an alternative economic theory, called Marxian economics. Marxian economics is based on the labor theory of value and assumes the value of good to be based on the amount of labor required to produce it. Under this axiom, capitalism was based on employers not paying the full value of workers' labor to create profit. The Austrian school responded to Marxian economics by viewing entrepreneurship as driving force of economic development. This replaced the labor theory of value by a system of supply and demand. Founding of psychology. Psychology as a scientific enterprise that was independent from philosophy began in 1879 when Wilhelm Wundt founded the first laboratory dedicated exclusively to psychological research, in Leipzig. Other important early contributors to the field include Hermann Ebbinghaus, a pioneer in memory studies, Ivan Pavlov, who discovered classical conditioning, William James, and Sigmund Freud. Freud's influence has been enormous, though more as cultural icon than a force in scientific psychology. Modern sociology. Modern sociology emerged in the early 19th century as the academic response to the modernization of the world. Among many early sociologists, example Emil Durkheim, the aim of sociology was in structuralism, understanding the cohesion of social groups, and developing an antidote to social disintegration. Max Weber was concerned with the modernization of society through the concept of rationalization, which he believed would trap individuals in an iron cage of rational thought. Some sociologists, including George Simmel and W. E. B. Du Bois, used more microsociological, qualitative analyses. This micro-level approach played an important role in American sociology, with the theories of George Herbert Mead and his student Herbert Blumer resulting in the creation of the symbolic interactionism approach to sociology. In particular, Just Auguste Comte illustrated with his work the transition from a theological to a metaphysical stage and, from this, to a positive stage. Kant took care of the classification of the sciences as well as a transit of humanity towards a situation of progress attributable to a re-examination of nature according to the affirmation of sociality as the basis of the scientifically interpreted society. 178. Romanticism. The Romantic movement of the early 19th century reshaped science by opening up new pursuits unexpected in the classical approaches of the Enlightenment. The decline of Romanticism occurred because a new movement, positivism, began to take hold of the ideals of the intellectuals after 1840 and lasted until about 1880. At the same time, the Romantic reaction to the Enlightenment produced thinkers such as Johann Gottfried Herder and later Wilhelm Dilthey, whose work formed the basis for the culture concept which is central to the discipline. Traditionally, much of the history of the subject was based on colonial encounters between Western Europe and the rest of the world, and much of 18th and 19th century anthropology is now classed as scientific racism. During the late 19th century, battles over the study of man took place between those of an anthropological persuasion, relying on anthropometrical techniques, and those of an ethnological persuasion, looking at cultures and traditions, and these distinctions became part of the later divide between physical anthropology and cultural anthropology, the latter ushered in by the students of Franz Boas. 20th century. Further information, 20th century in science. Science advanced dramatically during the 20th century. There were new and radical developments in the physical and life sciences, building on the progress from the 19th century. 179. Theory of relativity and quantum mechanics. Einstein's official portrait after receiving the 1921 Nobel Prize in Physics. The beginning of the 20th century brought the start of a revolution in physics. The long-held theories of Newton were shown not to be correct in all circumstances. Beginning in 1900, Max Planck, Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr and others developed quantum theories to explain various anomalous experimental results by introducing discrete energy levels. Not only did quantum mechanics show that the laws of motion did not hold on small scales, but the theory of general relativity, proposed by Einstein in 1915, showed that the fixed background of spacetime, on which both Newtonian mechanics and special relativity depended, could not exist. In 1925, Werner Heisenberg and Erwin Schrödinger formulated quantum mechanics, which explained the preceding quantum theories. Currently, general relativity and quantum mechanics are inconsistent with each other, and efforts are underway to unify the two. Big Bang. The observation by Edwin Hubble in 1929 that the speed at which galaxies recede positively correlates with their distance, led to the understanding that the universe is expanding, and the formulation of the Big Bang theory by Georges Lemaitre. George Gamow, Ralph Alpher, and Robert Herman had calculated that there should be evidence for a Big Bang in the background temperature of the universe. 180. In 1964, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, 181, discovered a 3 Kelvin background hiss in their Bell Labs radio telescope, the Holmdel-Horn antenna, which was evidence for this hypothesis, and formed the basis for a number of results that helped determine the age of the universe. In 1938, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann discovered nuclear fission with radiochemical methods, and in 1939 Lise Meitner and Otto Robert Frisch wrote the first theoretical interpretation of the fission process, which was later improved by Niels Bohr and John A. Wheeler. Further developments took place during World War II, which led to the practical application of radar and the development and use of the atomic bomb. Around this time, Qianxin Wu was recruited by the Manhattan Project to help develop a process for separating uranium metal into U-235 and U-238 isotopes by gaseous diffusion. 182. She was an expert experimentalist in beta decay and weak interaction physics. 183. 184. Wu designed an experiment, Siwu experiment, that enabled theoretical physicists Tsingtao Li and Chen-Ning Yang to disprove the law of parity experimentally, winning them a Nobel Prize in 1957. 183. Though the process had begun with the invention of the cyclotron by Ernest O. Lawrence in the 1930s, physics in the post-war period entered into a phase of what historians have called big science, requiring massive machines, budgets, and laboratories in order to test their theories and move into new frontiers. The primary patron of physics became state governments, who recognized that the support of basic research could often lead to technologies useful to both military and industrial applications. Advances in genetics. Watson and Crick used many aluminium templates like this one, which is the single base adenine, A, to build a physical model of DNA in 1953. In the early 20th century, the study of heredity became a major investigation after the rediscovery in 1900 of the laws of inheritance developed by Mendel. 185. The 20th century also saw the integration of physics and chemistry, with chemical properties explained as the result of the electronic structure of the atom. Linus Pauling's book on the nature of the chemical bond used the principles of quantum mechanics to deduce bond angles in ever more complicated molecules. Pauling's work culminated in the physical modeling of DNA, the secret of life, in the words of Francis Crick, 1953. In the same year, the Miller-Urey experiment demonstrated in a simulation of primordial processes that basic constituents of proteins, simple amino acids, could themselves be built up from simpler molecules, kickstarting decades of research into the chemical origins of life. By 1953, James D. Watson and Francis Crick clarified the basic structure of DNA, the genetic material for expressing life in all its forms. 186, building on the work of Maurice Wilkins and Rosalind Franklin, suggested that the structure of DNA was a double helix. In their famous paper Molecular Structure of Nucleic Acids, 186, in the late 20th century, the possibilities of genetic engineering became practical for the first time, and a massive international effort began in 1990 to map out an entire human genome, the Human Genome Project. The discipline of ecology typically traces its origin to the synthesis of Darwinian evolution and Humboldtian biogeography, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Equally important in the rise of ecology, however, were microbiology and soil science, particularly the cycle of life concept, prominent in the work Louis Pasteur and Ferdinand Cohn. The word ecology was coined by Ernst Haeckel, whose particularly holistic view of nature in general, and Darwin's theory in particular, was important in the spread of ecological thinking. In the 1930s, Arthur Tansley and others began developing the field of ecosystem ecology, which combined experimental soil science with physiological concepts of energy and the techniques of field biology. Space exploration. Einstein's paper on the quantum theory of radiation outlined the principles of the stimulated emission of photons. This led to the invention of the laser, light amplification by the stimulated emission of radiation, and the optical amplifier which ushered in the information age. 191, it is optical amplification that allows fiber optic networks to transmit the massive capacity of the Internet. Based on wireless transmission of electromagnetic radiation and global networks of cellular operation, the mobile phone became a primary means to access the Internet. 192. Developments in political science and economics. In political science during the 20th century, the study of ideology, behavioralism and international relations led to a multitude of pulsi subdisciplines including rational choice theory, voting theory, game theory, also used in economics, psephology, political geography/geopolitics, political anthropology/political psychology/political sociology, political economy, policy analysis, public administration, comparative political analysis and peace studies/conflict analysis. In economics, John Maynard Keynes prompted a division between microeconomics and macroeconomics in the 1920s. Under Keynesian economics, macroeconomic trends can overwhelm economic choices made by individuals. Governments should promote aggregate demand for goods as a means to encourage economic expansion. Following World War II, Milton Friedman created the concept of monetarism. Monetarism focuses on using the supply and demand of money as a method for controlling economic activity. In the 1970s, monetarism has adapted into supply-side economics, which advocates reducing taxes as a means to increase the amount of money available for economic expansion. Other modern schools of economic thought are New Classical Economics and New Keynesian Economics. New Classical Economics was developed in the 1970s, emphasizing solid microeconomics as the basis for macroeconomic growth. New Keynesian Economics was created partially in response to New Classical Economics, and deals with how inefficiencies in the market create a need for control by a central bank or government. Developments in psychology, sociology, and anthropology. Psychology in the 20th century saw a rejection of Freud's theories as being too unscientific, and a reaction against Edward Titchener's atomistic approach of the mind. This led to the formulation of behaviorism by John B. Watson, which was popularized by B.F. Skinner. Behaviorism proposed epistemologically limiting psychological study to overt behavior, since that could be reliably measured. Scientific knowledge of the mind was considered too metaphysical, hence impossible to achieve. The final decades of the 20th century have seen the rise of cognitive science, which considers the mind as once again a subject for investigation, using the tools of psychology, linguistics, computer science, philosophy, and neurobiology. New methods of visualizing the activity of the brain, such as PET scans and CAT scans, began to exert their influence as well, leading some researchers to investigate the mind by investigating the brain, rather than cognition. These new forms of investigation assume that a wide understanding of the human mind is possible, and that such an understanding may be applied to other research domains, such as artificial intelligence. Evolutionary theory was applied to behavior and introduced to anthropology and psychology through the works of cultural anthropologist Napoleon Chagnon. Physical anthropology would eventually become evolutionary anthropology, incorporating elements of evolutionary biology with cultural anthropology. American sociology in the 1940s and 1950s was dominated largely by Talcott Parsons, who argued that aspects of society that promoted structural integration were therefore functional. This structural functionalism approach was questioned in the 1960s, when sociologists came to see this approach as merely a justification for inequalities present in the status quo. In reaction, conflict theory was developed, which was based in part on the philosophies of Karl Marx. Conflict theorists saw society as an arena in which different groups compete for control over resources. Symbolic interactionism also came to be regarded as central to sociological thinking. Irving Goffman saw social interactions as a stage performance, with individuals preparing backstage and attempting to control their audience through impression management. While these theories are currently prominent in sociological thought, other approaches exist, including feminist theory, post-structuralism, rational choice theory, and postmodernism. In the mid-20th century, much of the methodologies of earlier anthropological and ethnographical study were re-evaluated with an eye towards research ethics, while at the same time the scope of investigation has broadened far beyond the traditional study of primitive cultures. 21st century. One possible signature of a Higgs boson from a simulated proton-proton collision. It decays almost immediately into two jets of hadrons and two electrons, visible as lines. Higgs boson. On July 4, 2012, physicists working at CERN's Large Hadron Collider announced that they had discovered a new subatomic particle greatly resembling the Higgs boson, a potential key to an understanding of why elementary particles have mass and indeed to the existence of diversity in life in the universe. 193. For now, some physicists are calling it a Higgs-like particle. 193. Peter Higgs was one of 6 physicists, working in 3 independent groups, who, in 1964, invented the notion of the Higgs field, cosmic molasses, along with Tom Kibble, Carl Hagen, Gerald Guralnick, François Englert and Robert Brout. 193. See also: History. History of mathematics. History of measurement. History of philosophy. History of astronomy. History of biology. History of chemistry. History of earth science. History of physics. History of the social sciences. History of science and technology. 2020s in science and technology. Science and technology in Canada. History of science and technology in China. Science and technology in India. Timeline of science and technology in the Islamic world. History of technology. History and philosophy of science. Philosophy of science. Imre Lakatos. Naive empiricism. History of scholarship. Science studies. History of science policy. List of experiments. List of multiple discoveries. List of Nobel laureates. List of people considered father or mother of a scientific field. List of scientists. List of years in science. Multiple discovery. Philosophy of history. Science. Fields of science. Cognitive sciences. Natural sciences. Social sciences. Science tourism. Theories and sociology of the history of science. Timelines of science. Timeline of scientific discoveries. Timeline of scientific experiments. Timeline of scientific thought. Timeline of the history of the scientific method. Women in science. Basic research, also called pure research, fundamental research, basic science, or pure science, is a type of scientific research with the aim of improving scientific theories for better understanding and predication of natural or other phenomena. 1. In contrast, applied research uses scientific theories to develop technology or techniques which can be used to intervene and alter natural or other phenomena. Though often driven simply by curiosity, 2. Basic research often fuels the technological innovations of applied science. 3. The two aims are often practiced simultaneously in coordinated research and development. In addition to innovations, basic research also serves to provide insight into nature around us and allows us to respect its innate value. 4. The development of this respect is what drives conservation efforts. Through learning about the environment, conservation efforts can be strengthened using research as a basis. 5. Technological innovations can unintentionally be created through this as well, as seen with examples such as kingfishers' beaks affecting the design for high-speed bullet train in Japan. 6. Overview. Despite smart people working on this problem for 50 years, we're still discovering surprisingly basic things about the earliest history of our world. It's quite humbling. Madia Kuk, scientist at the SETI Institute and lead researcher, November 2016, 7. Basic research advances fundamental knowledge about the world. It focuses on creating and refuting or supporting theories that explain observed phenomena. Pure research is the source of most new scientific ideas and ways of thinking about the world. It can be exploratory, descriptive, or explanatory. However, explanatory research is the most common. Citation needed. Basic research generates new ideas, principles, and theories, which may not be immediately utilized but nonetheless form the basis of progress and development in different fields. Today's computers, for example, could not exist without research in pure mathematics conducted over a century ago, for which there was no known practical application at the time. Basic research rarely helps practitioners directly with their everyday concerns. Nevertheless, it stimulates new ways of thinking that have the potential to revolutionize and dramatically improve how practitioners deal with a problem in the future. Citation needed. By country. Applied science focuses on the development of technology and techniques. In contrast, basic science develops scientific knowledge and predictions, principally in natural sciences but also in other empirical sciences, which are used as the scientific foundation for applied science. Basic science develops and establishes information to predict phenomena and perhaps to understand nature, whereas applied science uses portions of basic science to develop interventions via technology or technique to alter events or outcomes. 10. 11. Applied and basic sciences can interface closely in research and development. 12. 13. The interface between basic research and applied research has been studied by the National Science Foundation. A worker in basic scientific research is motivated by a driving curiosity about the unknown. When his explorations yield new knowledge, he experiences the satisfaction of those who first attain the summit of a mountain or the upper reaches of a river flowing through unmapped territory. Discovery of truth and understanding of nature are his objectives. His professional standing among his fellows depends upon the originality and soundness of his work. Creativeness in science is of a cloth with that of the poet or painter. 14. It conducted a study in which it traced the relationship between basic scientific research efforts and the development of major innovations, such as oral contraceptives and videotape recorders. This study found that basic research played a key role in the development in all of the innovations. The number of basic science research, clarification needed, that assisted in the production of a given innovation peaked between 20 and 30 years before the innovation itself. While most innovation takes the form of applied science and most innovation occurs in the private sector, basic research is a necessary precursor to almost all applied science and associated instances of innovation. Roughly 76% of basic research is conducted by universities. 15. A distinction can be made between basic science and disciplines such as medicine and technology. 10, 11, 16, 17, 18. They can be grouped as STM, science, technology, and medicine, not to be confused with STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STS, science, technology, and society. These groups are interrelated and influence each other. 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, although they may differ in the specifics such as methods and standards. 11, 16, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. The Nobel Prize mixes basic with applied sciences for its award in physiology or medicine. In contrast, the Royal Society of London awards distinguish natural science from applied science. 37. See also. blue skies research, hard and soft science, metascience, normative science, physics, precautionary principle, pure mathematics, pure chemistry. Applied science is the use of the scientific method and knowledge obtained via conclusions from the method to attain practical goals. It includes a broad range of disciplines such as engineering and medicine. Applied science is often contrasted with basic science, which is focused on advancing scientific theories and laws that explain and predict natural or other phenomena. 1. Applied science can also apply formal science, such as statistics and probability theory, as in epidemiology. Genetic epidemiology is an applied science applying both biological and statistical methods. Applied science can also apply social science, such as application of psychology in applied psychology, criminology, and law. Historical context. Historical development. Historians would want to see how applied science has evolved over time. When did societies start applying scientific principles to practical problems, and how did this practice change over centuries? Exploring historical examples of applied science, such as the development of engineering techniques in ancient civilizations or the emergence of modern medical practices, would be valuable. Applied research. Applied research is the practical application of science. It accesses and uses accumulated theories, knowledge, methods, and techniques for a specific state-business- or client-driven purpose. In contrast to engineering, applied research does not include analyses or optimization of business, economics, and costs. Applied research can be better understood in any area when contrasting it with basic or pure research. Basic geography research strives to create new theories and methods that aid in the explanation of the processes that shape the spatial structure of physical or human environments. Rather, applied research utilizes the already existing geographical theories and methods to comprehend and address particular empirical issues. 2. Applied research usually has specific commercial objectives related to products, procedures, or services. 3. The comparison of pure research and applied research provides a basic framework and direction for businesses to follow. Applied research deals with solving practical problems. 4. And generally employs empirical methodologies. Because applied research resides in the messy real world, strict research protocols may need to be relaxed. For example, it may be impossible to use a random sample. Thus, transparency in the methodology is crucial. Implications for interpretation of results brought about by relaxing an otherwise strict canon of methodology should also be considered. 5. Moreover, this type of research method applies natural sciences to human conditions. Frowny face. 6. Action research aids firms in identifying workable solutions to issues influencing them. Evaluation research, researchers examine available data to assist clients in making wise judgments. Industrial research, create new goods/services that will satisfy the demands of a target market. Industrial development would be scaling up production of the new goods/services for mass consumption to satisfy the economic demand of the customers while maximizing the ratio of the goods/service output rate to resource input rate, the ratio of goods/service revenue to material and energy costs, and the goods/service quality. Industrial development would be considered engineering. Industrial development would fall outside the scope of applied research. Since applied research has a provisional close to the problem and close to the data orientation, it may also use a more provisional conceptual framework such as working hypotheses or pillar questions. 7, 8. The OECD's Frascati Manual, 9, describes applied research as one of the three forms of research, along with basic research and experimental development. 10. Due to its practical focus, applied research information will be found in the literature associated with individual disciplines. 11. Applied science works as a system that branches into other fields of work that go more in depth of the system. Applied research is a method of problem solving and also practical in areas of science such as its presence in applied psychology. Applied psychology uses human behavior to grab information to be able to locate a main focus in an area that can contribute to finding a resolution. 12. More specific, this study is applied in the area of criminal psychology. With the knowledge obtained of applied research, studies are conducted on criminals alongside their behavior to apprehend them. 13. Moreover, the research extends to criminal investigations. Under this category, research methods demonstrate an understanding of the scientific method and social research designs used in criminological research. These reach more branches along the procedure towards the investigations, alongside laws, policy, and criminological theory. Engineering fields include thermodynamics, heat transfer, fluid mechanics, statics, dynamics, mechanics of materials, kinematics, electromagnetism, materials science, earth sciences, engineering physics. These fields are also within the scope of basic science. Medical sciences, for instance medical microbiology, pharmaceutical research and clinical virology, are applied sciences that apply biology and chemistry toward medicine. Pharmaceutical development would fall within the scope of engineering. In education. In Canada, the Netherlands and other places the Bachelor of Applied Science, BASc, is sometimes equivalent to the Bachelor of Engineering, and is classified as a professional degree. This is based on the age of the school where applied science used to include boiler making, surveying and engineering. There are also Bachelor of Applied Science degrees in child studies. The BASc tends to focus more on the application of the engineering sciences. In Australia and New Zealand, this degree is awarded in various fields of study and is considered a highly specialized professional degree. In the United Kingdom's educational system, applied science refers to a suite of vocational science qualifications that run alongside traditional General Certificate of Secondary Education or A-level sciences. 14. Applied science courses generally contain more coursework, also known as portfolio or internally assessed work, compared to their traditional counterparts. These are an evolution of the GNVQ qualifications that were offered up to 2005. These courses regularly come under scrutiny and are due for review following the Wolf Report 2011 Wink with a Frown 15, however, their merits are argued elsewhere. 16. In the United States, the College of William and Mary offers an undergraduate minor as well as Master of Science and Doctor of Philosophy degrees in applied science. Courses and research cover varied fields including neuroscience, optics, materials science and engineering, non-destructive testing, and nuclear magnetic resonance. 17. University of Nebraska-Lincoln offers a Bachelor of Science in Applied Science, an online completion Bachelor of Science in Applied Science and a Master of Applied Science. Coursework is centered on science, agriculture and natural resources with a wide range of options including ecology, food genetics, entrepreneurship, economics, policy, animal science and plant science. 18. In New York City, the Bloomberg administration awarded the consortium of Cornell Technion $100 million in city capital to construct the university's proposed applied sciences campus on Roosevelt Island. 19. See also: Technology Portal, Icon Science Portal, Basic Research, Exact Sciences, Hard and Soft Science, Invention, Secondary Research.